Chapter 1. Owl Letter Shatters Rich Dreams. The room was small, dim, and a little worse for wear. Paint peeled from the walls in long curls. Whoever had last repaired it must have done so more than 10 years ago. The 4 old wooden beds and the bedside tables matched the rest of the room, worn to a soft shine by years of use. Anyone who walked in could feel the history clinging to the place. This was a second-floor dormitory at St. Mary's Orphanage in Camden, London. The home had been around nearly 200 years. From the name, it was obvious it had once been church-run. Now, though, the church's influence had waned and the orphanage's funds were strained. Religion had been transformed in the centuries since 1789, and institutions that once thrived on donations now scraped by. The orphanage was far from wealthy. Ted Epiphany sat up on the edge of a bed and turned his small, pale hands over in his lap, confirming the odd certainty in his head. He had transmigrated. He was back in another life, his consciousness transplanted into the body of an 11-year-old boy. The date floating through his mind was June 30th, 1991. He was in London, alone in an orphanage dorm, and something else prickled at the edge of his thoughts, a warm, persistent glow that felt like a tool, a helper of some kind. System starting flashed through his mind with no warning. He'd read online about these golden finger systems in other transmigration stories. Now he had one too. His name, Ted Epiphany, came with odd resonance. Ted was short for Tedra, meaning a supreme gift. Epiphany meant manifestation or sudden revelation. The old woman who ran the orphanage, Grandma as everyone called her, had told him the story. On January 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany, she dreamed someone spoke to her. She couldn't remember the dream afterward, but when she opened the orphanage door that morning, there had been a newborn in swaddling clothes. She took him in and named him Epiphany. To her, the name was a sign. So Ted had grown up as Ted Epiphany, a sacred gift, as she liked to put it. Ted leaned back against the scuffed headboard, hands clasped behind his head, grinning to himself. I'm transmigrated. Amazing. The grin faded a little as reality set in. The orphanage might feed him, but it couldn't offer much more. His ribs showed beneath his shirt. Malnutrition would stunt his growth if something didn't change. He needed money, not a fortune, just enough to improve the meals and make life less meager. There weren't many options. At 11, he couldn't do heavy labor. Child labor laws and the general decency of strangers made that impossible. Begging was humiliating and unpredictable. He scanned the room for anything he could use, and his gaze fell on an old guitar propped in the corner, its paint worn thin and its body dented with age. That guitar had a history of its own. A kind couple had donated it years ago to one of the older boys. When that boy was adopted, he passed it on. It had gone from orphan to orphan until, by a mixture of luck and circumstance, it had ended up with Ted. The other 3 beds in the room were empty now. The other boys had been adopted one by one, leaving Ted alone with the instrument that had become the dorm's heirloom. He picked up a small round mirror and studied his reflection. He had delicate features and bright, alert eyes. He had black hair and dark eyes. By looks, he was East Asian, probably Chinese. It was a strange consolation in a strange life. No point waiting to get adopted, he decided. I'll have to make my own luck. He tuned the guitar and tested a chord. It was large for his 11-year-old frame. He wasn't much taller than the instrument, but the strings rang true. Busking was better than begging. The next day, the golden finger in his head gave no further instructions, but that didn't stop Ted from making plans. He found an old street map, thought through the distances an 11-year-old could manage, and settled on Camden Market as the best spot. Busy, carnival-like, and not too far. He wouldn't risk the slums or anything too rough. It took 20 minutes to convince Grandma to let him go. The market was only a 10-minute walk, and she liked the idea of him earning something to help with food. She walked with him the first day, a gray-clad guardian to his nervous energy. Ted played and sang for 3 hours until his voice was raw. When they packed up, they counted their earnings, £4.35. It wasn't much, but it bought a great deal more fruit and vegetables than the orphanage usually had in a week. The sight of a small boy playing familiar tunes had drawn a surprising number of coins and folded notes from passers-by. Grandma cried a little when they returned, delighted and relieved. She and her colleagues cared for dozens of children, from infants to teenagers, and any extra help felt like a blessing. She had known Ted liked to fiddle with that old guitar. She hadn't known he could sing like that. It was a comfort to think he might have a way to make a living when he left the orphanage someday. Over the next few days, Ted settled into a routine. He busked most afternoons and saved the money for groceries. He also spent spare moments in the orphanage's small reading room, hunting for newspapers and magazines. He wanted to be sure history hadn't shifted. He wanted to know if his knowledge of the future still held. Major events, World War I, World War II, the big landmarks were all the same. He breathed a quietly thrilled breath. Even though the golden finger in his mind seemed to boot up slowly, its notifications coming in a bit behind the times, he still had his memory of future developments. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla. His mind ran ahead. If he played his cards right, he could do more than just buy vegetables. He grinned and let himself daydream of lying on a pile of money. For now, however, Camden Market and a battered guitar would have to do. A few mildly ridiculous newspaper items entertained him. The tabloids always needed eye-catching stories. One small piece spoke of drunks claiming to have seen a half-goat, horned creature in the countryside. Sensationalism sold papers, and Ted shook his head at the silly headlines. For several days his earnings were steady, and the orphanage ate better. Then, on July 7th, everything changed. He just walked in from the market and had his guitar slung over his back when a sharp rapping came at the window. He nearly dropped the instrument. "I'm on the second floor," he called reflexively. A quick look revealed the culprit. An owl perched on the sill outside, clutching an envelope in its beak and regarding him with steady amber eyes. Ted opened the window cautiously. The owl hopped in without fuss and dropped the envelope on the sill before settling to one side, head tilted as if waiting. Ted took the envelope. It was thick parchment, addressed in emerald green ink. Mr. Ted, Epiphany St. Mary's Orphanage, Camden, London. No stamp. The flap was sealed with red wax, impressed with an emblem, a shield bearing a capital H, quartered by figures of a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a serpent. He felt something shift inside him, an old, impossible dream refracted into the present. The life of riches he had been imagining might have to wait. Another kind of future had just arrived. He smiled despite himself. Wizardry, then. A new journey had begun. Chapter 2. Acceptance. Ted's heart swelled with a joy he had never known. Even all the riches of the ordinary world couldn't compare to the thrill of a world of magic. "I'm going to be a wizard." Carefully he unfolded the letter. The first page read, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Sorcerer, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. Dear Mr. Epiphany, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September 1st. We await your owl by no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. The second page listed requirements. Uniform. First-year students will require 1. 3 sets of plain work robes, black. 2. 1 plain pointed hat for day wear, black. 3. 1 pair of protective gloves, dragon hide or similar material. 4. 1 winter cloak, black with silver fastenings. Please note, all student clothing must carry name tags. Textbooks. All students are required to have the following books. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1 by Miranda Goshawk, History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot, Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling, A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration by Emeric Switch, 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi by Felida Spore, Magical Drafts and Potions by Arsenius Jigger, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by Newt Scamander, The Dark Arts, A Guide to Self-Protection by Quentin Trimble. Other equipment, 1 wand, 1 cauldron, pewter, standard size 2, 1 set of glass or crystal files, 1 telescope, 1 brass set of scales. Students may bring an owl or a cat or a toad. Parents are reminded that first-year students are not allowed their own broomsticks. The parchment felt thick and heavy in his hands. Just holding it made his heart pound. What Apple, what Microsoft, what Tesla? I'm not bound to you anymore. I'm going to learn magic. An excited voice rose in his head, imagining possibilities. Learn magic, find Dumbledore, 800 stainless steel cauldrons. 4 great houses, strong connections, 10 professors, skilled techniques. Hogwarts is huge, 2,000 students from around the world. Stable job, high income, lifelong career. Guaranteed employment. Hoo, an owl beside him hooted impatiently. It blinked at the excited boy and made its displeasure clear. I'm not on overtime, you know. Sorry, please wait a moment, Ted murmured, roused. He took out paper and pen to write a reply. He couldn't simply write, "Yes, take me to Dumbledore." He had to sound like a hesitant schoolboy. "Ah, then I'll trouble you, Mr. Owl." Ted broke a small biscuit into crumbs, bribing the impatient postal owl. He couldn't afford to lose his acceptance reply. Watching the owl fly away, a little chime rang in his mind. Ding! System startup complete. The magic card system is at your service. Oh, double good fortune. Ted focused on the glow in his mind as new information appeared. Ted Epiphany level 1 wizard. Experience pool, 0 attributes, ordinary at muggles, 5 each. Strength 3, constitution 3, agility 4, intelligence, 6 perception, 6 spirit, 7 charm, 6 luck. Normal people are 0, can shift positive or negative. Talent, otherworld knowledge, gold. Skills, magic power of 1, magic resistance of 1, magic, none. Cards, none. Tasks, none. Before Ted could study it all, another chime sounded. Ding. Task triggered. Magic World. You are in Great Britain. Are you really going to miss the only magic school? Enroll. Goal. Successfully enroll in Hogwarts. Reward. 500 experience. +1 magic power level. Random card. A second prompt followed. Ding. Talent. Otherworld knowledge triggered. Gained knowledge. Pages from a mind power manual. Blue. Pages from a mind power manual. Blue. Records of a mind mage's profession. Requires 400 experience to redeem. A card image appeared in his mind. A blue-bordered card depicting a person surrounded by smoky, flame-like patterns, moving objects with thought. The system explained itself piece by piece. It collected experience points into a pool that could be spent to upgrade professions, cards, and magic. That he was a level 1 wizard naturally might explain why Hogwarts had sent him a letter. At 1,000 experience, he'd reach level 2, gaining 1 attribute point and 1 skill point. Every 4 levels, he'd earn a new talent. Attribute points were straightforward. Skill points increased specific skills. He currently had only magic power and magic resistance. His talent, otherworld knowledge, gold, would trigger monthly knowledge from other worlds. Each piece cost experience to redeem. For example, the Mind Power Manual required 400 experience. He had no spells yet and no cards, but he did have a simple task waiting. How to gain experience. Training, study, practice, experiments, and completing tasks all yielded experience, the system said. Ted reached out to test his magic power. He felt a subtle, indescribable force stirring inside him. Concentrating, he focused on a scrap of paper about 20 centimeters away and imagined moving it. After a few seconds, the paper trembled, lifted, and floated into his hand. Holy, he breathed. This actually works. The next day, Ted told Grandma as a joke that a magic school called Hogwarts had accepted him and that he had already replied. She didn't believe it. Oh, little Ted, don't get your hopes up. Maybe some kid is playing a prank. Ted kept busking in the market. His income was steady, small bills, lots of coins, while he waited for the owl's reply. He'd become a familiar sight at the market. Every day about a dozen people stopped to listen. Many dropped change into his open guitar case. He bowed to his listeners as they complimented him. A voice kissed by angels, a kindly woman said, hoping it would stay strong through his voice change. His guitar was old and went out of tune, but his singing was good. One last song for the night, Scarborough Fair. He strummed and sang softly. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there. She once was a true love of mine. The tune drew more people. Scarborough Fair had been a real marketplace since Viking times. The song itself dated back centuries. Though odd for a child to sing such an old ballad, the crowd was quiet and attentive. A silver-tabby British shorthair sat on a nearby railing listening as well. The melody had roots in both Muggle and wizarding tradition. Some of its origins traced back to a wizarding family, and it had become a classic among both worlds. When the last note faded, applause broke out and coins rained into the case. Ted bowed, packed his things, slung the guitar over his back, and walked over to the homeless man huddled by a wall. The man's hat had only a few coins. Business had been slow. Ted patted the small dog beside him, dropped a few pennies into the hat, and gave a two-fingered salute. "Good luck, sir." As the man thanked him, Ted noticed the tabby on the railing. He reached out to scoop it up and pet it. The cat started startled, then panicked, wriggled free, jumped down, and shot off like the wind. Ted thought maybe his cat handling skills were rusty after the recent upheaval and didn't think much of it. He headed home to the orphanage. All the way home, the silver tabby followed him stealthily, tail low and silent. The cat's thoughts were simple and fierce. Hunted scent. People without boundaries. Time to hunt. When Ted entered and greeted Grandma, the door he'd just closed was knocked on. A tall woman stood outside. She looked to be in her late 40s or early 50s, impeccably dressed and coiffed, wearing glasses, with an air of authority and a serious expression. She examined the black-haired, dark-eyed, yellow-skinned boy in front of her with a sharp, appraising gaze. He looked a little thin and undernourished. "Mr. Ted Epiphany?" she asked. "Yes, that's me. I am Professor Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts." Ted's mind raced. "I knew it, and I think I may have petted your cat a moment ago. Oh no, what have I done?" "Wait," Grandma blinked in surprise. "You mean this is a school that teaches magic? You're not." She didn't finish the word kidding. Even without it, Professor McGonagall's presence shut off any impulse to make a joke. That was the air of a head of house who had served for years. Severe, commanding, utterly respectable. She had her wand out and pointed it at Grandma, murmuring a few indistinct syllables. Grandma's expression changed on the spot. "Oh, Professor McGonagall, how wonderful. I'd be delighted if little Ted could attend your school. You two talk. I'll put the kettle on." She bustled off. Ted stared at the wand in McGonagall's hand. "Is that magic? It won't do anything bad to Grandma, will it?" For the first time since he'd met her, Professor McGonagall's face softened a fraction. The corners of her mouth twitched upward. "Don't worry, Mr. Epiphany. This charm won't harm her. She'll simply feel relieved that you've been accepted into a very good school." With that, she tapped the plate on the coffee table. The plate flipped, elongated, feathered into a sparrow, fluttered once around the room, and returned to perch on the table, then turned back into a plate. Ted made an incredulous, delighted sound. "Wow, that's amazing!" McGonagall nodded. "You have abilities most children don't you, Mr. Epiphany?" Ted glanced at the guitar propped against the wall. Best not mention the busking. "You mean this?" He reached for his teacup. It trembled, lifted, and flew into his hand. "Good." McGonagall studied him more closely. Very few untrained children could control magic like that. This one had talent. "Come with me. We'll buy your books and robes." "Professor, I should tell Grandma," Ted began. McGonagall waved him off. "No need. It's better not to explain this kind of thing to a muggle. She'll simply think you've been accepted." She finished the sentence with a little smile and a flick of her wand. If Ted had parents who were muggles, they would be told. The statute of secrecy allows guardians to know, but a woman who ran an orphanage and who had no legal guardianship? Different matter. McGonagall had used a small confundus charm and smoothed everything over. Ted blurted, "Do I need to bring luggage?" "No, we're only going to buy things now. You'll come back. There are still 2 months until school starts." They stepped out into the street. Ted hesitated. Professor McGonagall, I don't have much money. I only have £22 and 16 pence. Is that enough?" McGonagall's lips twitched. "I don't think you need to worry about that, Mr. Epiphany. Just call me Ted." "All right, Ted." She led him down a narrow lane, expression unreadable, but a little amused. Hogwarts provided an interest-free student loan for exceptional students like him, enough to get by until he graduated, to be repaid later. Practical and generous. Ted's thoughts raced in a different direction. Who was the last student to get a loan? He pictured Tom. "To save time, we'll use magic," McGonagall said. "It might be uncomfortable. Bear with it." "Okay, take my hand. Apparition." Ted felt himself slammed into a narrow, twisting tunnel, as if the world had been squeezed into a pipe. He tumbled and spun. When his feet finally found solid ground, he almost collapsed. His legs went weak, his stomach lurched, and nausea rode him for several long seconds. McGonagall was perfectly composed, watching him with a faintly pleased expression. She hadn't expected his resilience to be so good. Ted's first thought was that she'd done it on purpose. He sulked inwardly. They'd usually have taken the car, but McGonagall had decided he should feel the charm of magic firsthand. A small part of him was insulted, a larger part was exhilarated. He quickly listed the things he wanted to try and felt his mood brighten. Somewhere, an unseen system chimed. Ding. Task triggered. Once is enough. Pet her. What's wrong with petting a cat? What's wrong with petting a cat? If you turned into a hedgehog, I wouldn't pet you, would I? Target. Pet Professor McGonagall in her animagus form again. Reward. 250 XP plus 1 transfiguration level. Rough and prickly. Go for it. Ted stared at the notification. I was joking, he muttered to nobody. The system never took jokes lightly. Here we are, McGonagall said, guiding him to a tiny, unassuming doorway on Charing Cross Road, the Leaky Cauldron. The little pub had a wooden sign with a simple picture of a leaking cauldron. From the outside, it looked no bigger than a single shop front. McGonagall pushed the door open and let him in. Inside, the place was dim, lit by oil lamps and candles. The magic world didn't use much electricity. Old-fashioned lighting gave everything a warm, slightly seedy glow. Wooden tables, long, square, round, sat scattered about. Wizards in odd robes and stranger fashions drank and talked. An owl swung lazily on a perch. People greeted McGonagall warmly. Behind the bar, the bald owner, Tom Abbey, set down his glass and offered a broad smile. Professor McGonagall, long time, picking up this year's new students? Yes, I'm taking him to Diagon Alley to buy supplies, McGonagall replied. My granddaughter's starting this year, too. Tom waved cheerfully. A few pleasantries later, McGonagall led Ted through a back door that looked like a blind alley. A rubbish bin leaned against the brickwork. She stopped, raised her wand, and instructed, use your wand and tap 3 bricks up from the dumpster, then 2 across. Knock it. Ted did as she said. The thick brick wall shifted with grinding, creaking noises. Bricks slid back and overlapped. An arched doorway opened to reveal a cobbled alley lined with curious shops. Bizarre items were displayed in windows. Owls swooped overhead. Wizards in robes came and went. The air smelled of parchment, smoke, spices, and something like singed feather. This was Diagon Alley, where the wizarding world shopped. Even having seen it in films and pictures, Ted was stunned into silence. The system chimed again. Ding. Task triggered. The most famous wizard shopping street in Britain. Don't miss a single shop. Target. Complete Diagon Alley exploration to 100%. Progress, 1%. Reward, 100 XP, random card. Combat is more fun than shopping. McGonagall smiled at his wide-eyed wonder. You'll have plenty of time to look around later. For now, we need to get some money. You have quite a list of things to buy. She walked briskly. Ted's head turned left and right, trying to take in every detail. Florid shop signs, displays of brooms, robes, jars of strange ingredients, the odd book that seemed to shuffle its own pages. After a few minutes, they reached a fork. McGonagall stopped. Across the way stood a 3-story white building that dwarfed everything around it. Gringotts Wizarding Bank. From a distance, it looked stately, but close up there was something unsettling about its architecture. The marble columns were crooked, on purpose, crooked in their own unique ways from each floor. To Ted, who had once worked briefly in construction, the sight was almost unbearable. He itched to straighten them. Bronze doors loomed beneath imposing stonework, and goblin guards in scarlet and gold uniforms stood on either side with stiff, disdainful expressions. Engraved over the main entrance was a warning. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the one who steals. For those who take but do not earn, the severest punishment they shall learn. Ted smirked. They don't seem very trusting. Indeed, McGonagall said. Most people would have read the goblins as surly. Ted, watching them, saw something else. Bluster and hollow pride covering fear and greed. McGonagall produced his student loan from the counter. She waved some parchment and coins. The goblins behind their high desks peered down at them with the same hauteur. Their counters rose several feet. Anyone behind them needed a ladder to reach. There was an old-fashioned, almost mythic quality to the goblins' sense of ownership. In legends, they held that items created by their smiths remained their property. When the original owner died, goblins claimed the right to reclaim the item. That belief had caused trouble for kings and heroes. Gryffindor himself had once been cheated and beaten when he commissioned a weapon. Ted rolled the thought around in his head and grinned despite himself. Wand in hand, follow me. He wanted to chant it like a rhyme, half daring, half joking. Slay goblins? Raid Gringotts? No, not today. But the idea gleamed in his imagination like a rebellious spark. 4. Part-time job is a must. The first thing to do with money was buy a wand. Ollivander's wand shop, with its small, time-worn facade, displayed a single wand on a faded purple cushion in the window. Above the door, a peeling gold sign read, Ollivander's, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. If the sign was right, the Ollivanders had been making wands when Plato was still alive. When the spring and autumn and warring states were still clashing in the east, this family had already been crafting wands. Professor McGonagall pushed the door open, and the brass bell chimed crisply. The shop wasn't large. Apart from the counter and a long bench, the rest of the space was filled with shelves stacked to the ceiling, holding thousands of long, narrow boxes. The place was thick with dust, oddly so in a world where anyone could use Accio. An old man with a hairstyle not much better than Einstein's stepped silently from behind a shelf. Ah, Professor McGonagall, long time no see, so this is the little wizard who's coming to Hogwarts. This was Mr. Ollivander, the famous wand maker. Hold out your arm, he said. As he spoke, a ruler flew up from the counter and began measuring Ted's height and arm span. Which is your dominant hand? Right. Try this one, he waved, and a box flew across the counter. 12¼ inches, mahogany with a male unicorn tail hair core, suited to transfiguration. Oh no, Ted had barely touched it, he hadn't even waved it, before Ollivander plucked it away. Then how about this? Cherry wood, phoenix feather. Ted took it and gave a tentative wave. Bang! Bang! 2 loud bangs erupted, and the wand nearly flew from his grip. No, this won't do, Ollivander said, shaking his head. It really won't, Ted muttered. I need a wand, not a firecracker. Walnut dragon heartstring? Ollivander offered. That one shrieked and shot itself out of Ted's hand like a skyrocket. Ted tried 7 or 8 wands in a row. Some reacted too violently, others performed decently, but left a faint blockage in his magic. Nothing flowed entirely smoothly. Ted was unusually sensitive to magic and could feel the minor mismatches between wand and wielder. Ollivander, on the other hand, was endlessly enthusiastic, like someone playing Tetris and waiting for the right piece to fall. Professor McGonagall sat patiently on the bench. Ha! Picky little customer. I like it. Ollivander chuckled. We'll take our time. At Ollivander's, wands had only 3 core types: phoenix feather, unicorn hair, and dragon heartstring. Other wand makers sometimes used different cores. Fleur Delacour's wand, for example, contained Vila hair from her grandmother. There was mention somewhere of a German wand maker, Gregorovitch, though Ted couldn't remember what had become of him. As another box flew over, Ted felt something different before he even saw the wand, a faint, insistent pull from inside the box. Ollivander stroked the wand and began to describe it. Cedar, phoenix feather, 10¾ inches, with simple horizontal ridges on the handle for grip. The grain is rather brittle. Ted lifted it and felt magic flow smoothly, stronger and more alive than with any he'd tried so far. He waved it gently, and a cascade of streamers and fireworks fanned from the tip, nearly filling the shop. This time it was more like a grand sparkler. Delightful. Wonderful. It seems you two are a perfect match. Ollivander's face lit up. Cedar wands tend to take to owners of strong character and unusual loyalty. My father, Gervase Ollivander, used to say, the owner of a cedar wand will never be deceived. I agree. Cedar wands match highly perceptive owners, he went on. And a word of warning I add to my father's sayings, never make an enemy of a cedar wand owner, and never harm what they cherish. Those perfectly matched to cedar can be formidable opponents. Those who declare war on them thoughtlessly are often very surprised. 7 galleons, please. Ollivander held out his hand. Nice story. Unfortunately, no discount at the end. Ted left with his cedar wand and a swirl of conflicting thoughts. Other protagonists' wands were often their father's last work, or made from lightning-struck peach wood and the leg hair of some exotic beast collected on a mysterious grandfather's journey to the east. Was his wand ordinary? Were there no legendary wands left undiscovered? Boring. Absolutely boring. Still, the wand's attributes were good. Cedar wood, phoenix feather wand. Magic amplification. +1 level spell enhancement. +1 level keen insight. +1 perception. Note, a young man's first wand. Professor McGonagall looked pleased. All right, next we need to have your school robes made. Ted hesitated. Professor, there's a second-hand clothing shop and a thrift store nearby. Given my finances, buying second-hand might be wiser. McGonagall studied him. She'd watched him closely when she turned into a cat, and, satisfied he wasn't being stubborn in a foolish way, agreed. In truth, it would be unrealistic for Ted to buy everything new with his student loan. McGonagall had originally intended to buy 2 new robes and let Ted buy second-hand textbooks. Children still cared about appearances. But since Ted had insisted, she accepted it. They went first to the second-hand robe shop next to Madame Malkin's. Ted picked slightly larger old robes so he'd have room to grow. Then they checked the thrift store for useful items. No cauldron. They were all too damaged. Using one might accidentally blow up Professor Snape. He did, however, find a set of glass bottles. They were dirty but salvageable. Second-hand textbooks proved hard to come by. Perhaps the economy was bad and everyone was buying used books. Ted only managed to find 3: Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, Magical Drafts and Potions, and 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi. All right, Ted, I have my old textbooks. I can give them to you. For the rest, we'll buy new ones at the bookstore. McGonagall was generous and practical. Thank you, but I'd like to wait a bit. There's still nearly 2 months before term. Maybe I can find a few more second-hand books and save some galleons. Textbooks were so expensive. If he bought all new ones, his student loan would be nearly gone. Hogwarts provided room and board and didn't charge tuition, but not leaving himself even a sickle made him anxious. McGonagall remembered what she'd seen of Ted and agreed. She gave him the remaining student loan and let him search for bargains. After she saw him onto the bus, she left. Ted returned to the orphanage with his second-hand purchases. On the bus, he thought hard and made a decision. He had to earn money. Increase his street performing, or find work in Diagon Alley and earn galleons directly, no middlemen taking a cut. His first-year student loan was 20 galleons. In later years, it would drop to 5. This first trip to Diagon Alley had already cost him 7 galleons for a wand, and new textbooks could be another 12. There were other necessary items: the right cauldron and glassware for potions, dragonhide gloves for herbology, and he couldn't just skip classes. If he tried to buy everything new, he would be penniless, so he intended to hunt for second-hand bargains over the next 2 months and keep a few galleons for pocket money. He also had a 50-galleon limit when exchanging pounds at Gringotts. Money wasn't everything, but no money was impossible. He had to earn it. Besides, the otherworld knowledge his talent had granted, a few pages of Mind Power Manual, blue, required experience to redeem. He'd tested it 2 days earlier. Studying Muggle textbooks for a whole day had only yielded 4 or 5 experience points. If he didn't redeem the manual before the beginning of next month, it would be replaced by new otherworld knowledge. In 20 days, relying on self-study to get the 400 experience points he needed seemed unlikely. So, Diagon Alley for work it would be. Even if he couldn't trigger another quest, he could at least complete the exploration quest and pick up some practical experience and galleons. Ding, quest triggered. A single nut can stump a hero. To earn some money and gather experience, you must find a way. Diagon Alley offers many opportunities. It's a good choice. Objective: successfully find a job in Diagon Alley. Reward: 100 experience, card, restore stamina. Workers, working souls, working wizards are all superior people. Well, now he had even more reason to go. Chapter 5, Bearing Pressure. Unbefitting his age. Oh, little Ted, you're back. So, did you get accepted? Grandma asked eagerly. Yes, Grandma, I was accepted. And because of my special circumstances, the school even arranged a work-study position for me before term starts. I can work part-time there, food and lodging included. Ted laid it on thick with Grandma. He'd already decided to work in Diagon Alley and stay at Old Tom's Leaky Cauldron. Grandma was still reluctant. He was only 11 after all, going out to support himself, but many children from the orphanage had ended up like this, apprenticed early or sent to church schools. Reluctantly, she agreed to his work-study plan. After dinner, Ted packed. There wasn't much to bring, a few necessities and an old guitar. He'd given most of his toys to the younger children. Tomorrow he would go into the city, and his heart raced with excitement. He also needed to buy a few things. Parchment was expensive in the Muggle world, ink was cheap, and he wanted a notebook and a fountain pen. Quills were too thin for him. Ted kept a tight budget. If his school uniform hadn't needed a wizard tailor, he might have considered getting robes made in the Muggle world. He was too excited to sleep. He read under the covers with a small flashlight, poring over the standard book of spells, grade 1. He remembered that before enrollment, a wand could be used privately. Hermione once practiced spells at home and fixed Harry Potter's glasses on the train, so the trace hadn't been put on him yet. The Reasonable Restriction of Underage Sorcery Act, passed in 1875, forbade under-17s from performing magic outside school, so he had to make use of this window. The book's preface explained the basics. Spells add properties to things. Transfiguration changes them entirely. Minor spells were fragile and often wore off in hours or days. Dark magic, hexes and curses, wasn't covered. The first spell in the book was Lumos. Ted pulled out his wand and practiced the pronunciation and motion until he got the flow right. Lumos. At last, a pure white, flickering light shone from the tip of his wand. He'd earned 25 experience points for learning it. Subsequent uses gave far less experience. After the first big gain, he needed dozens of repeats to earn a single point, and his internal magic drained quickly. Still, learning Lumos on his first night felt like a small triumph. Exhausted and buzzed with magic, he finally fell asleep. The next morning, he said goodbye to a tearful grandma and boarded the bus. The leaky cauldron was dim as always, lit by candlesticks and oil lamps. The wizards drinking there looked like they preferred it that way. Ted wondered whether Lumos could be made permanent or if he could invent a cleaning-free magical lamp. He tapped the walls with ideas. If he could plaster those mottled walls white, they'd look much better. Perhaps wizards liked the medieval look. "Oh, you're the new student from yesterday. What was your name again?" Old Tom asked when he pushed open the door with a suitcase. Ted Epiphany, Mr. Tom. I need to stay here until school starts. How much is your cheapest room? And, if there's work, do you need a part-time waiter?" Old Tom looked Ted over. His clothes were old, his suitcase a bit battered, and in spite of his gruff appearance, the innkeeper had a soft heart. He gave Ted a tiny storeroom to sleep in for free, in exchange for helping clean up after closing and a free sandwich in the morning. Ted was grateful. The storeroom was cramped. A bed, a narrow bedside table used as a desk, not even room for a chair. But it was shelter, and that was everything. After he tidied the space, he changed into his second-hand wizard robe, took his wand, and stepped into the inn's backyard. He tapped a brick and an archway rumbled into place. Beyond it was the bustle of Diagon Alley. He wandered, trying not to look too lost. Where could he work? Gringotts was out of the question, and cauldron and broomstick shops didn't seem promising. He strolled past Elop's Owl Emporium, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes with its crackling show of jokes, the Magical Menagerie, Obscurus Books, Madame Purnell's Potion Shop, and Flourish and Blots. Oh, how he wanted to spend days there reading, if only books weren't so expensive. Reality, though, was harsher than his ideals. Every shop he asked turned him down. He was too young to be employed. The wizarding world truly seemed to enforce child labor laws. Ted felt his chances evaporating. Then a man next to him cursed and spilled a bucket. Ted yelped and jumped back as a writhing heap of slugs splattered across the pavement, slippery bodies wriggling everywhere. People backed away at the sight. The man swore, fixed the bucket with an oxio, and then looked at the slugs helplessly. Ted rolled up his sleeves and crouched down to help. The slugs were slimy and revolting. They slipped through his fingers when he tried to grab them. After several minutes of fumbling and swearing, they finally had them all back in the bucket. Thank you. Let me do it. Thank you, kid," the man kept saying, grateful. He pointed his wand, and with a flick, the slime on Ted's hands vanished. "I'm Slug Jiggers. I run Slug Jiggers Apothecary behind me. If you ever need potion ingredients, come by. I'll give you 20% off." Really? Then, do you need an hourly worker?" Ted asked, face innocent. Slug Jiggers blinked, surprised, then grinned. Ted had his first job, processing low-level potion ingredients like slugs. The terms were modest, no more than 3 hours a day, 14 sickles a week. Ted did the math. That equaled 3 galleons and 5 sickles a month. 1 galleon equals 17 sickles, 493 nuts. It wasn't much, but it was steady. For someone who'd never held a job before, it felt like a victory. A game-like notification chimed in his head. Ding. Mission green, completed. Reward, 100 experience. Card, restore stamina. 100 experience poured into his pool. He was still 800 or so short of leveling up, and a couple hundred shy of redeeming a blue Pages of the Mind power manual, but his momentum was building. He also got his first card. The card was bordered in green, showing a figure with arms outstretched, a green light swirling around them. Restore stamina. It was a spell card that consumed a small amount of magic to restore some spent stamina, with a 4-hour cooldown. Ted tried it when he was tired and felt a rush of energy, like downing a free vitality potion every 4 hours. It made the work more bearable and the day easier. He went back to the cauldron to tell Old Tom the news. Old Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "That's great. Have a butterbeer. It's on me." "It's at Slug Jigger's apothecary. I'll be processing low-level potion ingredients," Ted said. "Specifically?" Old Tom asked, setting a foaming oak mug in front of him. Ted flushed a little at the thought, but described the job, wearing special gloves to strip off the mucus, flicking it into a bucket, using a silver knife to open the slugs, squeeze out their innards, lay them flat, and wait for them to dry. Old Tom gave a wry whistle. He said, at a loss for words, then laughed. "Well, what else can an 11-year-old do before school? It's good Mr. Jiggers gave you the chance, and you'll pick up potion knowledge along the way." Ted felt proud. Despite everything, he'd managed to find a way forward. He was young, he was in a strange world, and he was already learning to bend with the pressures that nobody his age ought to have to bear, but he was doing it without complaint, ready to get to work. Chapter 6. The Ultimate Worker Form. Even after finding a part-time job, Ted couldn't stop at just one. Of course, he had to take several. Money was one reason, but experience was the other. Today, while learning how to process slugs with Mr. Giggs, Ted actually gained 16 full experience points. After that, although he handled fewer slugs himself, processing a dozen or so still yielded 1 or 2 points each time. So why stop? More jobs meant more experience. 2 days later, Ted had packed his free time full. He woke up each morning, helped Old Tom tidy the leaky cauldron, ate a simple breakfast, and headed to Diagon Alley for work. Mornings were spent at Giggs's apothecary, transporting and preparing basic, high-demand potion ingredients, slugs, sliced roots, wade powders, tied-up bird feathers. He'd learned the summoning charm, Axio, from Mr. Giggs yesterday. That spell was indispensable. Without it, a morning's work would leave him practically marinated in potion ingredients. Ted learned a lot at the apothecary and saw many rare ingredients: iron-skinned rhinoceros horns, sound-dampening bird feathers, giant squid ink sacs. Mr. Giggs explained their properties and how to process them, but didn't let Ted handle the expensive ones. If Ted messed up, his wages for months would be gone. At noon, he moved on to the magical menagerie. His tasks there were cleaning enclosures, clearing droppings, feeding animals, and refilling water. The shop kept many safe, harmless magical beasts you could own as pets: puffskeins, giant orange snails, morphing rabbits, antlered rabbits, ravens, two-tailed salamanders, purple giant toads, and so on. Some animals had particular needs. Don't startle them with loud noises or don't feed them watery foods. The work left him exhausted. He usually had to use a restore stamina card on himself afterwards. After restoring his stamina, he ate the free lunch provided at the pet shop, then went to Flourish and Blot's for the afternoon. Flourish and Blot's was where Hogwarts students bought textbooks. The bookstore was vast and the catalog complex. Most of Ted's 2 hours there were spent organizing, fetching a book from the storage room and placing it on the shelf. The storeroom was enormous. He even found old volumes caked in dust that hadn't been touched for 7 or 8 years. These jobs weren't easy either. After work, he returned to the leaky cauldron to rest, read, and study, practicing simple and safe spells. He hadn't attempted the levitation charm or transfiguration. He remembered Professor Flitwick's warnings from the original story about someone levitating a wild ox and having it land on them, and transfiguration was even riskier without guidance. Each time the restore stamina Greenhard cooled down, he used it again. Then it was time for dinner. Old Tom usually gave him something simple and an occasional butterbeer or 2 pies. "You're still growing, kid," Old Tom always said. "Eat more so you've got strength." By 6 or 7 in the evening, the leaky cauldron emptied out. Wizard nightlife was less vibrant than in the Muggle world. Ted helped Old Tom clean up. With Axio, tidying tables and arranging goblets was much easier. After using Axio so many times a day, the charm had become second nature. When there was nothing left to do, Ted would light an oil lamp in his storeroom and study more deeply, taking notes, recording questions, and waiting for school to start so he could ask professors. He repeatedly practiced the few spells he'd taught himself until his magic reserves felt drained. Magic had levels and proficiency. When proficiency filled up, it could upgrade, making effects stronger. Experience points could also substitute for proficiency, allowing a one-step upgrade by paying points. Ted's diligence worried Old Tom. He thought Ted was working himself too hard and that his young body might not be able to take it. "This kid," Old Tom muttered, "the ultimate worker in Diagon Alley. 10 galleons a month? Why risk your life? And with all this studying, what am I supposed to feel, a man in his 50s? If I'd had you in school, I'd have been crushed by your drive." But Ted knew he wasn't just after money. He was accumulating experience. His otherworld knowledge was still waiting to be exchanged. If the Mind Mage class was what he expected, the sooner he converted it, the better. Over the past 2 days, he'd also found several secondhand textbooks, worn but usable, with scribbled notes and doodles left by past owners. He'd picked up most of what he needed for school: a brass scale, a secondhand telescope. Pets weren't a priority. He didn't have anyone to write to. Letters could be sent by the school owls for free. Brooms also weren't a major consideration. Flying might be fun, but he didn't want a stick between his legs, and first-year students weren't even allowed to bring brooms to school. Working in Diagon Alley had given Ted a sense of the wizarding world as something of a post-medieval place. While Muggles watched television and fiddled with computers, wizards read newspapers and listened to the wireless. Magic radio hadn't been widely popularized. People read the Daily Prophet, Witch Weekly, and the Quibbler to learn what was new. The Daily Prophet covered social news and was mainstream. Ted freeloaded on Old Tom's papers. Witch Weekly handled entertainment. Lockhart had won its Most Charming Smile award multiple times, and contained news from wizarding communities beyond Britain. The Quibbler specialized in sensational, often baffling rumors. It sold well despite its oddities. The British magical population probably numbered only 20 to 30,000 people, which explained the statute of secrecy. This was essentially a large village. Grindelwald's ambitions had been global. Voldemort's were local, a village bully causing horrific damage within Britain. 10 years of terror had killed hundreds of wizards and muggles alike, an enormous toll for such a small community. A week went by in a flash. One afternoon, while Ted was processing ingredients at the apothecary, he heard a commotion outside. Looking up, he saw a crowd gathered on the street, pointing and talking excitedly. Mr. Giggs came back in from the street, and Ted set down the scrubbed turtle shell. Rhode Island mud turtles grew a layer of aquatic plants on their shells that affected their medicinal properties if not cleaned, and asked, "Mr. Giggs, what's happening out there? Is some shop having a sale?" Mr. Giggs was Diagon Alley's gossip expert. Since Ted started working for him, his own workload had lightened, and he'd had more time to listen and spread news. He pulled his robe aside, sat down, and grinned. "A new shop opened," he said. Ted kept scrubbing but played along. "What kind of shop?" "A blacksmith," Mr. Giggs said. "Run by dwarves." Ted froze, brush in hand. "Dwarves? Dwarves?" he repeated. "What do you mean by dwarves?" "The short, stout, bearded kind," Mr. Giggs said. "One of the otherworld races that appeared after the Celestial Convergence 10 years ago." Dwarves, Celestial Convergence, otherworld races. Ted's head spun as questions piled up. Thanks to reader Kanshu Ren for the 500 reward. Thanks to reader Yuan Yuan Ya for the 100 reward. Chapter 7. Everything has changed. What exactly happened with the Celestial Convergence you mentioned? Ted's throat went dry. A bad premonition sat heavy in his chest. Mr. Giggs's next words confirmed his fear. Celestial convergence is a term in the magical world for when two worlds intersect. It's only happened twice so far. The first time was in 1945, reportedly soon after Dumbledore defeated Grindelwald and imprisoned him in Nurmengard. The skies fell into chaos, the stars were all out of place, and even in daylight, enormous celestial bodies drifted across the firmament. The strange celestial phenomena lasted 4.5 months. The weather went mad. Scalding sun could turn into blinding snow in hours. It rained at the poles, and egg-sized hail fell in the tropics. Day length fluctuated wildly. The longest day had the sun up for 40 straight hours, while the shortest had only 12 hours total of day and night. Things that had never existed here before appeared. Creatures, herbs, and other things from other worlds. Magical beings ran rampant, terrifying muggles already panicked by the weather and the sky. If it hadn't been for the chaos of the Second World War and the relative lack of photography and film at the time, the statute of secrecy might have been irrevocably broken. The magic world poured enormous effort into using muggle governments and sympathetic media to cover things up for months, then did their best to conceal the newly arrived creatures. Even now, occasional accidental sightings of such beings still overwhelm the Ministry's Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures and the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. Mr. Giggs chuckled with a kind of schadenfreude when he mentioned it, clearly amused by the Ministry's difficulties. Ted suddenly remembered wild newspaper stories he'd seen as a child, tales he'd always assumed were sensationalism. He hadn't thought they were true. The second convergence was 10 years ago, Mr. Giggs went on, after you-know-who was defeated by the boy who lived. You mean the boy who lived, Harry Potter? Ted asked. Of course not. Mr. Giggs slapped his thigh excitedly. It was Neville Longbottom. Ted's mouth went dry. Neville Longbottom? The name flashed through his mind like a fuse. This was worse than he'd imagined. Mr. Giggs nodded. Yes. Neville Longbottom defeated you-know-who when he was just over a year old and ended the chaos. The second convergence happened after his downfall. He pointed toward the window. Races like dwarves, elves, demi-humans, and even some ugly, vicious kinds of merfolk, kobolds, and goblins arrived after the second convergence. It's been 10 years now. The tortoise shell in Ted's hand tightened as if about to crack. Dwarves, yes, but elves too? Demi-humans? Merfolk and kobolds? Ted trembled with anger, cold sweat breaking out despite the summer heat. It felt like the whole world had turned against transmigrators. When could transmigrators ever get a break? He wanted to scream. Tears pricked his eyes. This world was full of hostility toward people like him. When would they ever be accepted? Giggs kept chatting as if nothing was wrong. Dwarves and elves are more like wizards in disposition. That dwarf blacksmith in Diagon Alley is the first shop opened by an otherworld race. Everyone's been flocking there to see. By the way, Ted, why don't you go take a look? You're always saying work should be done. This is work. Ted got to his feet stiffly and walked out like a sleepwalker, the idea of celestial convergence looping through his mind. If these things really happened, could the original plot still proceed? Colonel Chu had said the greatest advantage of a transmigrator was familiarity with the plot. Now that advantage felt gone. Damn it. He went to Diagon Alley to see the dwarves. They matched the fantasy stereotype, about 1.3 meters tall, stout like fat wine barrels, with long beards braided and threaded with copper rings. The dwarf boss had a booming voice, as if permanently under the effect of a sonorous charm. He scowled at the gawking wizards. Oh my. Did the elder go senile? What's the point of opening a smithy here? Watched like a bunch of monkeys. What are we to forge for these skinny wizards? His voice thundered. Beside him, a female dwarf, beardless but still short and squat, tugged his sleeve. Keep your voice down. The elder wants us to integrate into the wizarding world. Opening a shop is the first step. Ted finally calmed a little. That afternoon, while restocking shelves at the bookstore, he asked a clerk named Aaron, "Do you know any books about the celestial convergence?" Aaron nodded. "Are you interested because of the new dwarf smithy?" "There's a book, Fantastic Beasts That Appeared Within 10 Years, supplement. It came out 2 months ago. Other than that, the only detailed record is in History of Magic for the last decade. You have to understand, we still don't know how many new things arrived. 10 years is nothing." There could be weird things in remote valleys we haven't seen yet. Ted skimmed the supplement. It cataloged everything from goblins to kobolds. For now, merfolk, goblins, and kobolds are all cataloged by the Ministry as fantastic beasts, and they're considered dangerous. These races often lack a common tongue with wizards and can be openly hostile. In their native worlds, they might be monsters. Here, they're classified as such. As for the history of magic, Ted had never cared for that textbook. Who wants to read dense histories? But he couldn't help being surprised by the upheavals of the last decade. After work, Ted headed back to the leaky cauldron. Old Tom was still polishing oak tankards behind the counter. Ted asked quietly, "Mr. Tom, a dwarf blacksmith opened in Diagon Alley today. I heard the term celestial convergence. Can you tell me more?" As a publican, Old Tom knew his gossip. Celestial convergence, eh? Yeah, there was a big mess 10 years ago. A lot of careless wizards got killed by those otherworld monsters and races. He went on to recount the last decade's encounters with otherworld races and creatures. The elves, dwarves, and gnomes he described fit Ted's impressions, each with their own civilizations and magical traditions. The elves, in particular, were beautiful, elegant, wealthy, magically powerful, and long-lived, qualities that made them very attractive to the wizarding elite. An elder of the elven race was invited to join the Wizengamot 5 years after the Second Convergence, Old Tom said. The Daily Prophet ran stories for a week. Ted frowned. The Wizengamot, older than the Ministry and wielding great influence, included high-ranking officials and prominent wizards. An elven elder being invited in such a short time showed how highly the elves were regarded. Old Tom explained demi-humans too, humans with certain animal traits like animal ears or tails. Furries, in other words. Compared to merfolk, kobolds, and goblins, who sometimes killed and ate people and were classed as humanoid monsters, demi-humans were recognized as humanoid races, essentially people. But that didn't mean they were universally accepted. Many pureblood families treated demi-humans with contempt, calling them lowly as muggles or half-breeds. As for the otherworld monsters, there were far too many to keep track of in a single night. Old Tom lent Ted a copy of a book called Magical Creatures You Should Know. It had come out the previous year and detailed not only common fantastic beasts and dark arts creatures, but also many dangerous entities that had appeared after the 2 celestial convergences. "Take your time with it," Old Tom said, sliding the book across the counter. "No rush to bring it back." Ted took the book with hands that still trembled a little and settled in to read. The world had changed, twice, and he was only beginning to understand how much the future might be altered by those changes. 8. You are really strong when you're strong. Ted let out a long breath. "Can you tell me about the boy who lived, Neville Longbottom? I used to live in a Muggle orphanage and only recently heard about him." Old Tom raised an eyebrow. "Oh, that one. The savior, the boy who lived. Thanks to him, things aren't as bad as they might have been. He survived that catastrophe and somehow defeated you-know-who. He was only a year old back then. I heard he never showed much talent. Some even say he was just lucky," Old Tom went on. "But whatever the reason, it was because of him that you-know-who fell. We can sit and talk instead of living in darkness and fear. We owe him a lot." Back in his small storeroom, Ted didn't go on with spell practice. Instead, he picked up a battered second-hand copy of History of Magic he'd never opened. The previous owner hadn't been careful. The illustrations had been doodled on, some faces sporting crude mustaches, but it was cheap and readable. Ted flipped to 1970 and began there, reading about Voldemort's open defiance of the Ministry and the rise of the Death Eaters. He didn't yet know what had happened in the original timeline during those 10 years, but by 1981, the record diverged sharply. According to this book, Voldemort had raided the Auror safe house where the Longbottoms lived. The couple had had chances to escape, but chose to fight to the death to protect their child. Then, when Voldemort aimed to kill baby Neville, something went wrong. The attack left an S-shaped scar across Neville's forehead, and Voldemort himself died. Shortly after, a second celestial conjunction occurred. If the first conjunction had changed celestial phenomena and climate and introduced plants, animals, and monsters from other worlds, the second had brought intelligent races. Elves, dwarves, gnomes, and demi-humans had been accepted as human races in the magical world, while merfolk, kobolds, goblins, hill giants, and others were classed as humanoid monsters. Different civilizations and languages, but generally brutal and ugly in nature. Everything in the world felt rearranged. It seemed this world should be renamed Neville Longbottom. Voldemort had chosen Neville as his great enemy. The title of savior had shifted. The two celestial conjunctions had saturated the world with foreign creatures and influences, the full effects still uncertain. Ted felt the advantage of knowing the original plot slipping away. Sigh. He closed the book. No matter. He still had to live. Whether the boy who lived was Neville or Harry, he would still need to learn magic and grow stronger. He had an edge, some kind of advantage, and that was enough. This wasn't a tragedy. He opened Magical Theory. The book was by Adalbert Waffling, the supposed father of magical theory. Everyone who'd studied magic had read his work. Waffling's text framed magic as will made manifest. Spells and wands were tools, useful auxiliaries to shape and control magic, but the core power came from the caster's will and desire. That explained why wild magical outbursts could happen without wands or spells. Primitive magic was possible, but dangerous and uncontrollable. 2,000 years ago, wizards had standardized magic with spells and wands to lower the difficulty of casting and expand what could be learned. In earlier times, a wizard might only master a handful of spells aligned with their talent. Healers specializing in cures, potion makers in brewing, transfigurists in transformation, making them vulnerable in other areas. The development of standardized spells had been a game changer. Ted reached for another book he'd borrowed from the shop, Controlling Your Magic Power, a must-read for little wizards. It was a shallow primer, but exactly what novices needed to avoid dangerous outbursts. He also had a copy of The Power of Will. One of the perks of working at Flourish and Blots was access to unsold stock. In the warehouse, there were old, forgotten volumes piled for years. Ted even found a copy of The Invisible Book of the Invisible Monster. They had been treated like dead stock because customers couldn't easily find them, but to Ted, they were treasures. He took meticulous notes from everything. With steady study and practice, his in-game skill bar finally registered a new entry, Spell LV1. He'd reached the introductory level of spellcasting. It was a small milestone, but it mattered. No matter how the world changed, the fundamental answer was personal strength. If he wanted to survive, he had to get stronger. The next day, he went back to the apothecary to process herbs. He could now prepare more than a dozen varieties, a rapid improvement that came from diligence. Ted had written down every word Mr. Giggs said about potion ingredients and reviewed his notes each night. Pretty soon, Giggs didn't need to repeat instructions. Ted handled the tedious, repetitive work that was necessary but time-consuming. Giggs appreciated having a reliable assistant. Giggs returned one afternoon with a bulging backpack that clearly wore an undetectable extension charm. He kept pulling out items that were many times the bag's apparent volume. "What are these?" Ted asked. "Heh, these aren't easy to get," Giggs said, grinning. "New species that appeared after the celestial conjunction. We've tested them. Some proved valuable for potions." He handed Ted a simple white flower. "This is a calming flower," Giggs said, "useful in healing potions." The name sparked a strange familiarity in Ted. "Unlike Dittany," Giggs went on, "it can also treat internal injuries. Dittany can't replace it." He laid out more specimens, silverleaf, earthroot, herbs that had only appeared since the conjunction. Finally, he pulled a large glass jar filled with liquid. Something like a pig's brain floated inside. "Water ghoul brain," Giggs said. "Water ghouls are another monster that came after the conjunction. Stay away from deep water. These things are dangerous." Ted's mind keeled through odd associations. Calming flower, silverleaf, earthroot. Those names echoed of places and things he'd known from other games and stories. Water ghouls brought to mind grotesque creatures from other fantasy tales. What exactly had converged here in the conjunctions? The influx of herbs and monster parts felt like pieces of other worlds grafted onto this one. He learned a great deal that day, new herbology skills, new potion ingredients, but the discoveries left him more unsettled than satisfied. The world had become stranger in ways he didn't fully understand, and knowledge alone wasn't comfort. He made more notes and steeled himself. Whatever came through the conjunctions, whatever surprises other worlds had brought, his plan remained the same: learn, grow stronger, and adapt. 9. Psychic powers. My thigh is me. Psychic powers. My thigh is me. Since the dwarf blacksmith opened his shop in Diagon Alley, nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Business at the forge was sparse, and there were no imagined clanging noises. After all, this was the magical world, and soundproofing spells were common. Or maybe there simply wasn't much business to begin with. For the past 20-odd days, Ted had been grinding experience like mad, taking 4 part-time jobs a day. With the 100 experience reward from the previous quest, Worker Green, he finally reached 400 experience, enough to exchange for otherworld knowledge. If he hadn't had the Restore Stamina card, which he used 5 or 6 times a day, he probably wouldn't have lasted more than a few days. Ted muttered to himself, not without pride, I'm still an 11-year-old kid. Having finally met the requirement by noon, Ted forced himself to finish his evening shift and returned to his small storeroom. Leveling up still felt far off. A level would only grant a single skill point and 1 free attribute point, so the immediate benefit was limited. But the otherworld knowledge he could exchange now had a time limit, and if it was what he hoped it would be, it could be extremely useful. System? Ted lowered his voice. Exchange otherworld knowledge for me, Mind Power Manual Fragment. As the experience in his pool fell to single digits, a flood of information poured into his mind. A sudden epiphany lit up his thoughts, and an indescribable force filled his spirit. This was mind power. Mind power differs from ordinary magic. While magic channels external sources, runes, wands, incantations, mind power grows from the practitioner's own mind and consciousness through long-term, disciplined mental training. It is an inner energy, drawn from one's vitality and will. That makes it more convenient in some ways. No need for materials, gestures, or words, just intention. But because it consumes the user's own life force and spirit, overuse leaves the caster physically and mentally exhausted, even unable to concentrate. Burn too much, and you risk serious harm. In short, mind power is powerful but exacts a price. Mind power divides into many branches. The 6 principal disciplines are mind prophecy, observers. They uncover hidden secrets, glimpse immediate futures, find concealed things, and gain knowledge otherwise unobtainable, somewhat like divination. Mind creation, form shapers. They use mind power to create objects, creatures, or forms of matter. Mind transformation, power manipulators. These masters control and transmute energy and matter, moving, melting, deforming, or detonating targets, and can shape mind power into manifestations like mind lightning, mind flames, or force fields. Mind self-shaping, shapeshifters. They alter physical properties and physiological traits of beings or environments, similar to transfiguration. Mind teleportation, spirit travelers. They move themselves, objects, or others across time or space. Mind enchantment, empaths. They excel at mental contact and control, detecting and influencing minds, changing behavior, or breaking wills. This is the branch closest to controlling conscious beings, abilities akin to legilimency, confundus, even imperial-like domination. Mind power can be as miraculous as magic. Unfortunately for Ted, his fragment blue was partial, so he only received 3 basic abilities: appraisal, memory palace, and spirit crystal servant. Appraisal lets the user gather information about people or objects, their properties, functions, and hidden traits. This fits the observer role in mind prophecy. Memory palace is a common utility. The mind mage sculpts a mental space to store scenes they've seen, heard, and experienced, retrieving them swiftly by keyword. It's like a portable pensieve. For Ted, it meant he could photocopy books and information at a glance and recall them perfectly later for detailed study. Spirit Crystal Servant is unique. A mind mage replicates a fragment of their consciousness into a crystal to form a sentient helper, roughly palm-sized. Because it contains part of its master's personality, it's nearly as intelligent and can speak the languages the master knows. The servant sharpens the master's senses, grows crystalline legs to move, shares some abilities, has no eyes but possesses extrasensory perception, links telepathically to its master, and assists with mental calculations. It's a tremendous aid, but its strength depends on the quality and size of the crystal used. Ted didn't have a fist-sized, high-quality crystal yet, so the servant would have to wait until he was stronger and had more money. Memory Palace and Spirit Crystal Servant complemented each other well, the former as storage, the latter as processing. If the Memory Palace was a hard drive, the Spirit Crystal Servant was CPU and RAM. Though he had only 3 abilities for now, mastering them would let him grow and discover more applications over time. A system notice informed Ted the character interface had changed. He opened it and read, Ted Epiphany. Level 1, Wizard, Level 1, Mind Mage, Experience Pool 8 Attributes, Average Adult Muggle equal 5, Strength 3, Constitution 3, Agility 4, Intelligence 6, Perception 7, Spirit 9, Charisma 7, Luck, Normal 0, Fluctuates. Talent, Otherworld Knowledge, Skills, Magic Power Level 1, Magic Resistance Level 1, Spell of 1, Mind Power Level 1, Mental Resistance Level 2, Prophecy Level 1, Magic, Lumos Level 1, Scouring Charm Level 1, Cutting Curse Level 1, Mending Charm Level 1, Mind Power, Appraisal, Memory Palace, Spirit Crystal Servant, inactive. Cards restore stamina, green. Quests, Magic World, 1 and done, do her, explore Diagon Alley. Because he had activated Mind Power, Ted had become a Mind Mage, and his attributes adjusted accordingly. +1 Perception, +2 Spirit, +1 Charisma. He also gained Mental Resistance Level 2 and Prophecy Level 1. Since Mind Power draws on Spirit and Will, the Spirit attribute rose by 2 points. The sharpened mind and mental presence added to Perception and Charisma. Mental Resistance made sense. The better you are at probing and manipulating minds, the better you are at defending yours. Ted guessed the extra prophecy level came from appraisal being part of the mind prophecy discipline. He'd self-taught 4 spells, all still at level 1. Unlike magic, Mind Power didn't seem to have rigid levels. Its effectiveness depended on the strength of the user's own mind. Ted stared at the screen, fists clenched, and let out a laugh that had been bottled up ever since he arrived in the magical world. The pressure that had shadowed him, especially after hearing about the celestial convergence and that savior Neville, finally eased. Bring it on. As long as I'm strong enough, I won't fear any changes. Strength is the true power. Who needs to cling to the hero's coattails when you can be the one they cling to? From now on, I'm the Thigh. Call me Brother Thigh. Thanks to friends, Starbook Star Friend Lighting, and surname Nobi Name Nobita for the 100 reward. Thank you. Chapter 10. No wonder Voldemort chose Neville. With the Memory Palace ability, Ted could practically claim he had a photographic memory. His learning efficiency shot up almost tenfold. He could first record an entire book in his mind and then digest it slowly at night. After awakening as a Mind Mage, he also began to gain abilities specific to that class. The Mind Mage profession, apparently imported from a Dungeons & Dragons-style worldview, had its own list of mind powers. Aside from special branch talents, many abilities could be developed individually. What puzzled him was that this world didn't even have the classic fantasy canon he remembered from the Muggle world. No Tolkien, no Dungeons & Dragons, not even the Lord of the Rings. He could understand not having Harry Potter, but none of that. It meant that while major events in this world had stayed familiar, the cultural and entertainment details were entirely different. Had he pursued becoming a Wall Street tycoon in his old life, he might have ended up very differently here. Mind mages naturally needed a grounding in psychology, so Ted found 2 textbooks in a Muggle bookstore. One was Jung's Psychological Types, clear, provocative writing that helped with self-understanding and reading others. The other was Allport's Social Psychology, a book that marked the formal establishment of social psychology as a science. Ted learned a lot from self-study, though he knew it was only a small fraction of what the books contained. If he had the chance, he wanted to study psychology formally at a Muggle university. For now, self-study was enough. He was in the fastest stage of mind power development. Ted developed 3 minor mind mage abilities. The first was reading. He could instantly imprint recognized words and patterns into his mind. Mind power accelerated his brain's processing of text images. He could flip through a book casually and remember everything, like quantum speed reading. It paired perfectly with the Memory Palace. For days, he read obsessively at Flourish and Blots. The warehouse became his favorite haunt. He organized, read, and stored knowledge in his mind like a busy squirrel and even voluntarily worked overtime. The owner, amused and embarrassed by his dedication, wanted to give him a raise. Maybe Ted's charm had increased too, making people more inclined to like him. Charm art was his second ability. It subtly influenced the minds of people nearby to view him with calm friendliness. It wasn't an intimidation or fear power. Those were the talents reclusive or malicious mind mages favored. Charm art was a passive, constant effect. He didn't even need to think about activating it. The third ability was an active skill, concealed thoughts. When activated, it shielded his mental activities so others couldn't read his emotions or thoughts. With it on, lie detectors would be useless. He wasn't sure, though, whether it could withstand a powerful legilimency. On the magic front, he started a different book, A Little Surprise for Your Enemy, a manual on the dark arts. Dark arts covered a wide range, from dangerous curses to simple prank jinxes. Ted learned a prank spell, Den Sojo, which made the front teeth of the victim grow as long as carrots, forcing their mouth open. For practice, he fed a mouse well for 2 days, then tried the spell on it. Even after release, the poor creature seemed cursed. Ted's skill bar pinged. Dark Arts Level 1. Old Tom, who had taken Ted in as a bit of a handyman, began to look at him with new eyes. Working 4 jobs a day, studying spells and textbooks by lamplight at night for over 20 days, such discipline and perseverance were unusual even for adults. And Ted's magic talent was high. Old Tom had seen himself learn the Scouring Charm, the Mending Charm, Aguamenti, and Densaugio. For a little wizard from a muggle background to acquire so much by himself, it was astonishing. Maybe poor kids do grow up faster, Old Tom muttered. He starts school this year. I might introduce him to my granddaughter, Hannah. And Ted's meals improved. Now and then he got meat and small cakes. Within a couple of days, he met Old Tom's granddaughter, Hannah Abbott, a rosy-cheeked girl with 2 golden braids. She would be his classmate in a month. Ted caught himself thinking, Hannah Abbott, and couldn't help chuckling. Even the Sorting Hat couldn't preserve pure blood lines in this world. The choice of the savior was going to be unexpected indeed. On the last day of July, after finishing his work processing medicinal herbs at the apothecary, Ted used the remaining time to explore Diagon Alley. His mapping mission was 87% complete. Only a few shops remained unentered. He drifted like a street loafer, familiarizing himself with storefronts and side alleys. When he paused by the closed, impressive doors of a Floo powder shop, a male voice caught his ear. Harry, what do you think of this Nimbus 2000? Shall I get you one? Birthday gifts are separate, of course. No, I don't like flying brooms, and I don't like Quidditch. Drop it. Harry? Ted's heart leaped. He turned and saw a well-dressed, long-haired man with a mustache standing beside an elegant, serene-looking woman. Between them was a little girl about Ted's age with lively eyes and glasses. She did not look meek in the least. The broom shop attendant called the man Mr. Trank Black. Black. Sirius Black? The little girl was Harry? A girl? Ted's thoughts went haywire. Of course, if Harry was a girl in this world, of course Voldemort wouldn't have chosen her. Given Voldemort's personality, he wouldn't consider his great enemy to be female. Was Voldemort sexist? The mental image made Ted snort inwardly. Before he could sort himself out, the adults near them began trading barbed remarks with another impeccably dressed man and a boy. Both had platinum blonde hair and an aristocratic air. Sirius, with a cynical smile, said, "Oh, Malfoy, shopping in person today? Come to collect rent, are you?" The older Malfoy kept his aristocratic posture and answered without changing expression. "I'm at least your cousin-in-law." "Is that how you speak to me, Black? Where's your decorum?" The two sides were clearly Malfoy and Son squaring off with Sirius and his companions. Ted watched, field notes half forgotten, and realized the world he was cataloging had its own strange, familiar differences. Differences that made everything suddenly, gloriously unpredictable. Sirius looked at the older Malfoy. "Cousin-in-law? Exactly. That's precisely what I've always regretted." At that, Harry Potter, chin tilted in that familiar, arrogant way, jabbed at the slick-haired younger Malfoy. "Hey, Malfoy, what do you put in your hair? Feels like flies would just slip right off." The remark was a double entendre and delivered with perfect malice. Sirius grinned like he'd won a duel. Old Malfoy barely glanced at them, unreadable as ever. Young Malfoy covered his head and glared, his anger barely held back. They were kin, after all. Even if they hated one another, they couldn't very well come to blows in the street. The elegant lady between them had restrained Sirius and patted Harry's shoulder to warn her away from being too sharp. With someone like that mediating, and old Malfoy unwilling to let his pride be trampled, both sides slunk off after only a few words. After they left, Ted went into the broom shop and asked the assistant about Mr. Black. By now, Ted was a familiar face in Diagon Alley, the street loafer who turned up in shops every day to watch and sometimes lend a hand. The broom shop assistant was full of gossip. "You mean Mr. Black?" he said. "Sirius Black, the heir of the old pureblood Black family. Miss Olivia is his wife, and little Harry is their adopted daughter." He rattled off more snippets he'd picked up about the Blacks. Back at the Leaky Cauldron later, Ted tried to sort the mess of facts out in his head. The key difference in this world was the prophecy. Because Harry stayed Harry, Voldemort had, after hearing the prophecy, targeted Neville Longbottom, who also matched the conditions. The result was the same as in the original story. Neville was struck down, and the boy who lived came into being. But in this version, James and Lily Potter could not escape their fate either. Shortly after Voldemort's fall, they were ambushed and killed by a band of Death Eaters. According to the broom shop assistant, someone close to the Potters betrayed them, undoubtedly Peter Pettigrew. Ted's emotions swung wildly when he first realized he had transmigrated into this world. At first, he dreamed of reaching the pinnacle of existence. When he learned Neville was the chosen one and Harry was merely Harry, he settled into the pragmatic option. Surviving was enough. The last time his mood had shifted so drastically was after graduating and drifting for a few years, but since awakening his mind power, he'd learned to regulate himself. He felt steadier now, able to watch an avalanche or a sparrow with the same calm face. That sort of composure, he figured, was what appointed a true general. Mind mages tended to fall into two camps: mind control, which explored and disciplined the inner self, and frenzy, which stoked extreme emotions for raw power. Ted was following mind control. August arrived, and with it a system chime the moment he woke. Ding! Talent Otherworld Knowledge Gold triggered. Gained knowledge. Chakra Refinement Technique. Chakra Refinement Technique Green. Records the Konoha method of blending physical and spiritual energy to extract chakra. Requires 250 experience to redeem. Ted studied the card art, a figure seated in meditation, fingers in a hand seal, blue energy coursing through vein-like channels. He frowned. This otherworld knowledge felt useless here. Being a ninja in the world of Neville Longbottom, something was off. Compared with chakra, magic seemed to have far more practical potential in this place, and he certainly didn't have an Otsutsuki bloodline. 250 experience for a basic chakra technique? Robbery. This was the sort of thing 5- or 6-year-old ninja cadets in Konoha learned. Without complementary ninjutsu, it was almost worthless here. Not all otherworld knowledge would be helpful, he realized. A lot might even be harmful. He decided to decline the card. Better to focus on magic and psionics. Psionic power, after all, was as vast as the mind itself, centered on will and rooted in spirit, the same attribute that governed magic. The two could complement one another. To train both, Ted made 2 wooden balls and practiced, rolling them in his hands, making them float and spin with either psionic focus or small bits of magic. Between work and practice, he learned 2 spells in 2 days. From the magical menagerie assistant, he picked up the packing charm, incantation, pack. It made clothes fold themselves and luggage arranged neatly, indispensable for travel and housework. From Mr. Giggs, the apothecary owner, he learned the bubblehead charm. A transparent bubble forms around the head like a helmet, filtering gases and allowing underwater breathing. Fleur Delacour had used it in the Triwizard Tournament. It was a staple for herbologists and potion makers, and a perfect replacement for a mundane mask. Mr. Giggs was surprised Ted mastered the bubblehead charm so quickly. It was 4th-year charms material, and most adults in this world had long since let the finer points of magic rust away. Ted had seen the same back home. Knowledge you don't use gets returned to the teachers. He kept grinding experience and pushing the progress on his exploration quests. School started in less than a month. He wanted to finish the quest, explore Diagon Alley, Green, before then. On the 8th, he was about to leave the magical menagerie after lunch when John the assistant called him back. "Wait, Ted. What is it?" "You know, we recently hatched a clutch of speaking raven eggs," John said. "Most are fine, but one came late. It's tiny and weak. The shop probably won't be keeping it." "Won't be keeping it" meant it would be discarded. John looked at Ted hopefully. After years caring for creatures, he couldn't bear to see the weakest put down. "Of course I'll take it," Ted said. "I'll do my best." The chick had just opened its eyes, a few stubby feathers, skin thinner than the others. It was small enough to fit in the palm of his hand and sounded like it might not survive the next hour. Ted fed it every 2 hours, and at night woke to do the 4-hour feedings. Whether it was Mr. Giggs's restorative potions or Ted's round-the-clock care, the chick pulled through. It grew downy feathers, wobbled a few steps, and began to make soft, tentative chirps with a pale, yellow-edged beak. Ravens are the aristocrats of the crow family, large, black, with a purplish-blue sheen and long throat feathers. In Britain, they hold a peculiar place in legend, so much so that the Tower of London keeps ravens, because superstition says if they ever leave, the kingdom will fall. Some tower ravens are said to be over 40 years old. Human-speaking ravens are rare and clever. They can learn to speak and often deliver messages like owls. This little raven was quick to learn. It responded to certain words as if it understood them. Ted named it Ansu, after the raven god of Outland from one of his favorite games, and hoped the name would fit its bold spirit. Please vote for the poor, pitiful, ravenous Ansu so it can grow up quickly. When Ansu is grown, it will absorb all the bad luck of my readers. Chapter 12. Good news. Hermione wizards often formed close bonds with their animal companions, magic pets. Once a master and pet established that relationship, they signed a primal magical contract. It was a little like choosing a wand for a young wizard. Ted was glad to have Ansu. He hadn't been able to afford an owl, and a fledgling raven was a good substitute. Ansu still needed another couple of weeks before she could fly properly, but it was easier to raise a bird from youth anyway. Over the past few days, Ted had been studying basic movement charms, the foundation for spells like Actio and the landing charm. Those theoretical spells were usually taught in a 3rd or 4th year Care of Magical Creatures class, and a lot of witches and wizards only knew how to perform a spell without understanding the underlying principles. Ted liked to learn the theory as well as the practice. With less than 2 weeks before term started, he felt he had to prepare more, mainly to earn money. As a Hogwarts freshman, he had a small foreign exchange allowance that let him convert pounds into galleons more easily than earning galleons directly in Diagon Alley. Before, busking had earned him 10 to 20 pounds a day, equivalent to 4 or 5 galleons. So the street performer who'd vanished for over a month made a triumphant return. This time, Ted had upgraded his set. He'd mended his battered guitar with a mending charm, improving its tone. He dressed a little sharper, a second-hand tuxedo jacket and a top hat. And Ansu, the clever little raven, perched on his shoulder, cawing to draw a crowd. The bird would sometimes pick up coins from the audience and drop them into the guitar case, which always earned laughter and applause. People in London weren't used to seeing a bird so involved in the act. Now that Ted had learned some magic, he added street magic to his repertoire and doubled his drawing power. He alternated playing and singing with small magical stunts, enough to keep the crowd entertained but framed as tricks. He could honestly do a bit of real magic, sending a playing card to dance around him, producing a ribbon, pulling a rose from thin air, but he presented it as entertainment. If a passing witch or wizard suspected anything serious, he could always shrug and say, "It's all sleight of hand, just for fun, sir." Business was better than he dared hope. He made over 30 pounds the first day, and crowds swelled on the second. After a week, he'd become a minor attraction, 3 or 4 hours a day, 40 or 50 onlookers at a time. The image helped: top hat, slightly shabby tux, fledgling raven on the shoulder, and a broken wooden guitar that still sounded beautiful. He sang well, played well. The occasional magic trick left people baffled, and Ansu seemed almost to understand instructions. If he kept at it for another 10 days, he might even go viral. After a week, he'd raised more than 300 pounds. Enough, converted into galleons, not only to cover his student loan but to leave him with a tidy sum, assuming the exchange allowance held. He planned one more day of performance and then to stop. Even with an excuse to avoid ministry trouble, it was better not to draw too much attention. "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your encouragement," he told the crowd. "I'm about to go to school, so today may be my last show. If fate allows, we'll meet again on the streets." "For you tonight, Casablanca," he said with a theatrical bow. He picked up the guitar and sang. His voice was tender and slightly weary beyond his years. "I fell in love with you watching Casablanca, backseat of the car, the lights flickering at the drive-in show. We made love on a long, hot summer's night. I thought you fell in love with me watching Casablanca. Oh, the kisses in Casablanca are still there. Please come back to me in Casablanca. As time goes by, I'll love you more and more each day." The classic tune drew warm applause and a steady stream of coins. A teenage girl dropped a 5-pound note. A kindly older couple added a few more. Ted ran through his magic routine: cards, scarves, roses, a vanishing and reappearing Ansu, and the audience watched with rapt attention. When the girl's father handed her another note, Ted made a small flourish. He hid the note behind one hand, snapped his fingers, produced a tiny wildflower, and presented it to her with a bow. Then he packed up. The crowd dispersed. The father and daughter headed to their car, still chatting about the performance. "He sings so well," the girl said. "Yes, very moving," the father agreed. She had a calm, thoughtful air that made her seem older than her years. "What did you think of his magic? Do you think it's real? I didn't see a wand." "It was probably theatrics," he said. "If you're really planning for Hogwarts, write to us. If you don't adapt, we can always return to Muggle schooling. No need to force it." "No, Dad," the girl answered excitedly. "Hogwarts will be amazing." "All right, hang on. We're almost home, Hermione." The generous young lady had been Hermione Granger. Ted felt a small, private relief. Thank goodness it was her. If things had gone differently, he might have invited far more trouble than he wanted. Thanks to fellow reader Worrieltown for the 500 reward. Thanks to fellow reader Jiang Xiaopi Genpi for the 100 reward. Chapter 13. School is about to start. Ted spent his last few Muggle pounds on practical things: underwear, toiletries, notebooks, pens, and ink. He also bought snacks for Ansu: white mice, lists, locusts, and crickets. At first, Ansu had been content with mealworms, but it had quickly graduated to larger prey. The crow-like creature was terrifyingly efficient. Its beak could shatter a mouse's skull in one peck, then it pinned the carcass with its claws and tore it apart. Ansu was monstrously capable. With his purchases done, Ted went back into Diagon Alley and walked into Gringotts. He placed his cash on the counter and looked up at the goblin. "Sir, I'd like to exchange these into galleons." The old goblin adjusted his spectacles and studied the boy. "Do you have your admission letter?" Ted handed it over. The goblin inspected it carefully and then pushed it back across the marble. "The exchange limit is 50 galleons a year. How much are you changing?" "What's the rate?" Ted asked. £5 to 1 galleon. Ted counted out 250 British pounds and placed them on the counter. The goblin's eyes flashed with mild surprise. It did not expect a boy in a second-hand robe to have so much ready cash, but it said nothing further and poured 50 gleaming galleons into a pouch for him. Ted weighed the bag in his hand as he left the bank and felt a grin spread across his face. He probably wouldn't need to borrow any money next year. Maybe he could even start paying off this year's loan. No debts, no worries. As the start of term drew near, Diagon Alley filled with families buying supplies. Flourish and Blots, Madame Malkin's, and every other shop were bustling. Ted's own days grew busier too. A few days before the start of term, he was shelving books at Flourish and Blots when a familiar voice called out, "Dad, that's him, the singing little wizard, and his raven." He turned to see a man and a girl walk in. They were his old customers. Ted stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Hello, I'm Ted Epiphany. I'm starting Hogwarts this year. Thank you for coming to my performance." The man extended a hand. "Hello, I'm Chris Granger. I'm a dentist. You know what a dentist does, right?" Ted took his hand without missing a beat. "Of course, I just prefer not to find out," he said, making a mock terrified face. The man laughed, a warm, surprised laugh. "Sorry, I didn't expect a little wizard to have such a sense of humor." The girl at his side looked at Ted with wide, curious eyes. "This is my daughter, Hermione. She's also starting Hogwarts this year and insisted on buying a few more books." Hermione lit up when Ted mentioned he worked in Diagon Alley before school. She was genuinely impressed. A boy who could sing, play guitar, do tricks, and keep a tame raven, and who had spent the summer learning magic while working in the shops. She peppered him with questions about what he'd been doing. Mr. Granger, noticing his daughter's enthusiasm, exchanged a quick look with Ted that was equal parts concern and admiration. The couple ran their own dental practice and were not inclined to let their daughter work, but they clearly approved of her curiosity. Ted offered to show them around. He led Mr. and Mrs. Granger and Hermione through the alley, pointing out the best places for potion ingredients, pets, and other supplies. Giggs Apothecary stocks real potion materials. "Mr. Giggs gave me my first part-time job," Ted said. "If you ever want a pet, the magical menagerie has the most extraordinary creatures. I help look after them and do the feeding." Hermione hung on every word. Unlike parents who fretted over chores or homework, she was thrilled to meet someone who'd actually lived the kind of pre-Hogwarts summer she dreamed of. After a bit of coaxing, and thanks to Ted's assurances that owls weren't as burdensome as they seemed, Mr. Granger agreed to buy her an owl. At Elop's Owl Emporium, Hermione picked a long-eared bird, graceful with two tufts that looked like little ears and beautiful plumage. She named it Magic. They finished with a drink at the Leaky Cauldron. Ted and Hermione shared butterbeer, while Mr. Granger, keeping an eye on the road, had a children's drink and pronounced the butterbeer excellent. The last days of August passed in a blur. Ted resigned his part-time positions and retreated to a small storage room above the Leaky Cauldron to study. During those quiet hours, he made a breakthrough in a different kind of magic. He taught himself to enter a state of complete focus, a psychological flow in which the rest of the world dropped away and he could work for hours, absorbed and efficient. It was intense, but he limited himself to 4 hours a day so he wouldn't burn out. The technique dramatically improved his study and research. He kept writing back and forth with Hermione. Magic proved a tireless messenger, making almost a daily round trip between their houses. Ted enjoyed telling her the little differences between Muggle life and the magical world, and explaining whatever new tricks he discovered. She returned the enthusiasm in full. Her curiosity made every letter a lively exchange about spells, creatures, and strange habits. By the end of August, Ansu had grown considerably. It could fly higher and farther than before, and it insisted on helping. When Ted decided to send a letter to Hermione arranging to meet on the train, he tied it to Ansu's leg. The crow puffed out its chest, spread its wings, and gave a confident caw, as if to say, "Leave it to me." Tomorrow would be September 1st, the day the Hogwarts Express left for school. The day he had been waiting for had finally arrived. 14. Dalaran Canon Fodder Mage Training Manual. When Ted went to bed that night, he checked his experience pool, 462 XP. 100 of those points came from the quest Explore Diagon Alley, Green. That morning, he had finally waited long enough for the Floo Powder headquarters to open. He'd strolled in pretending to be curious and had been politely escorted out. Ted grumbled to himself. "Today they ignore me. Tomorrow I'll be impossible to reach." But the quest was complete, and that last 1% of exploration progress was finally finished. The quest reward included a random card. When Ted claimed it, 3 cards appeared, and he could choose one. The first showed a long-eared owl holding an envelope. Magic Postman, Red-Horned Owl Jimmy, green. Summon card. Jimmy was a small messenger owl, fast and excellent at delivering letters, though not suited for large packages. Single use. The card would disappear after summoning the owl. The second card showed a dark-covered book with a blood-red title and black smoke leaking from its binding. 17th Century Dark Arts Guide. Green. Item card. A tome recording dark arts common in the 17th century. Dangerous, notorious, and something to keep secret. The third card depicted a plump, fierce-looking wild boar bursting out of a firecracker. Motion lines showing how fast it charged. Wild boar firecracker. Green. Item card. A prank toy. Throw it to the ground, and a phantom wild boar would appear and charge at people. Lasted 30 seconds, 5-hour cooldown. It was repeatable. Ted picked the wild boar firecracker. It couldn't harm anyone, only scare them, and it was reusable. The dark arts book was tempting, but he wasn't ready to take that kind of risk. He had a lot to learn at school and didn't need to get flagged for practicing dark arts. Hogwarts's library was the most complete collection in the British wizarding world. There would be plenty of time to learn dangerous things later. For now, safety first. Satisfied, he went to sleep secure with 462 XP. Tomorrow was the start of school, and also when his otherworld knowledge would update. With experience in hand, he felt no pressure and slept soundly. The next morning, just after he woke, a system message popped up. Ding. Talent. Otherworld knowledge. Triggered. Discovered. Dalaran Jr., Canon Fodder Mage. Crossed out. Battle Mage Training Manual. The Dalaran Jr. Battle Mage Training Manual recorded the study and training materials for Dalaran Mage apprentices. It required 310 XP to exchange. Ted blinked. He knew Dalaran well, a veteran location in Otherworld lore. Canon Fodder Mage? He snorted at the crossed-out title. Disguise or not, he recognized what it meant. Still, it was magic-related and far better than anything like chakra, so he exchanged the manual. 310 XP vanished and a flood of knowledge filled his mind. After reviewing what had been added, Ted had a clearer idea. A junior battle mage was a caster who had only mastered a handful of low-level combat spells, clearly cannon fodder. True mages focused on the mysteries of magic, not just rote combat spells like Ice Arrow, Ice Ring, Fireball, and Arcane Missiles. This manual felt like training for a magic technician, a couple of years of basic drills, then shipped to the front lines. A producer of expendable magic personnel, not a cultivator of talent. That said, something was better than nothing. The 16 spells listed could be valuable. The manual listed 3 frost spells, Ice Arrow, Frost Armor, Frost Nova, 3 fire spells, Fire Impact, Fireball, Flame Strike, and 10 arcane spells, Arcane Wisdom, Arcane Missiles, Create Water, Create Food, Transfiguration, Slow Fall, Magic Suppression, Flash, Evocation, and Teleport, Dalaran. According to the manual, a graduate would be roughly the equivalent of a level 20 mage in Azeroth, still a long way from true mastery, but able to taste the power of being a magic user. Ted thought about how these 16 spells, even if intended for cannon fodder, were crucial. The magic world he was in offered far fewer offensive and defensive options than Azeroth, which faced world-ending crises every year. Even a green-grade Otherworld knowledge manual like this could be more useful than some thin mind power manuals. The arcane spells in particular had great research value. Old Tom watched Ted leave with a suitcase and felt a little dazed. It seemed like only yesterday, the scrawny kid had asked him about the cheapest room. 2 months had changed Ted. He'd put on weight and grown taller. Luckily, the second-hand wizard's robe he'd bought was oversized. Now Ted was off to school. Feeling unexpectedly sentimental, Old Tom called after him. "Kid, study hard. Come back and visit when you can." Ted waved, pushed open the leaky cauldron's door, and stepped out into the street. King's Cross Station was bustling. Ted dragged his worn suitcase, carried a small leather case, wore the oversized robe, clutched his wand, and checked the one-way train ticket in his pocket. He found the third pillar between platforms 9 and 10. It was solid. Walking through wouldn't work. You needed a run-up. It was 10:40, and the train left at 11. Ted had left early, but the bus hadn't cooperated. With a small sprint, he crashed through the barrier, and the world shifted. Beyond lay platform 9 3/4. Adults and children in robes, owls hooting, cats weaving between legs. An old-fashioned red and black steam train waited on the edge, its engine marked 5972. If it had been 957, it would have been perfect. Wizards probably hadn't built the engine themselves. They'd likely requisitioned it. Inside the train, a corridor ran to the right and a row of small compartments to the left, all retro and cozy. Ted walked down the corridor and finally found Hermione, who was popping her head out of one compartment with Ansu perched on her shoulder. "Here, Ted, here!" Hermione called. "I thought you were going to be late," Ted smiled. "I underestimated the bus driver's strike." He stepped into the compartment. Besides Hermione, there were 2 other children already seated. One was a shy, chubby boy who gave Ted an awkward, polite nod and smile, someone who looked uncomfortable with attention. The other was smaller than his peers, with bright eyes and two round, chestnut-colored ears peeking from his hair, clearly a demi-human of the rat ear tribe. Ted had seen demi-humans twice in Diagon Alley over the past 2 months, but never up close. He hadn't expected to meet one on the first-year train. Hermione bustled over and introduced them. "This is Neville, Neville Longbottom." Ted internally reacted. Ah, of course. He knew the name. How could he not? "I read it in a book." Ted held out his hand and shook Neville's tentative fingers. "Hello, Ted Epiphany. Please call me Ted." Nice to meet you. Just call me Neville." Neville looked nervous and small, face folding into a pleading expression that made Ted worry for him. Ted surprised Neville by not asking about the lightning scar. Relief washed over Neville. Ever since he was little, everyone who knew him wanted to see it. He hated showing the mark that had cost his parents their lives and had never learned how to refuse. Ted won his favor instantly by not bringing it up. Hermione pointed toward the window seat. "This is Jerry. He's from the rat ear tribe. Also new this year. We'll all be in the same class." Ted shook Jerry's hand. "Hello, Jerry. Call me Ted." "Hello, Ted." Jerry's bright energy was obvious. His eyes flicked about the compartment. For a moment, the carriage fell awkwardly silent. Neville barely spoke and avoided meeting anyone's gaze, and Jerry looked like he wanted to speak but held back in the unfamiliar company. Hermione, clutching her textbook, talked animatedly about spells with Ted, and the two others kept glancing discreetly at him. They had already seen Hermione's talent, both in mind and magic. Neville, who came from the long-established Longbottom family, had always struggled with his wand. He had only managed a magical outburst at age 10 during his uncle's falling experiment, and before that many had whispered he might be a squib. The rumors stung. People called him the dunderhead savior and worse. He wanted nothing more than to be an ordinary, unobtrusive wizard, but that felt nearly impossible under everyone's expectations. It eased Neville a little to find that these new classmates weren't gawking at him like some curiosity. Jerry had only touched a wand for the first time half a month ago, and though born into the magical world, his rat ear tribe heritage meant some pureblood families treated him like an outsider. Hermione, from a Muggle family, was already competent with several spells. And this Ted, who kept steering their conversation, seemed to know things he didn't. Ted noticed the furtive glances, but didn't mind. After a while, Neville relaxed into the strange new atmosphere. Jerry, meanwhile, was fascinated by two smooth wooden beads Ted twirled. Sometimes they seemed to spin of their own accord. Magic, perhaps? At that moment, Hermione's pet raven Ansu slipped free from its cage, flew to the luggage rack, and preened with delighted caws. "Caw, caw, someone's too close." Ansu's black feathers shimmered with blue iridescence. He was almost full-grown at 30 centimeters and could speak a little human speech. Neville peered at him with envy, holding his toad Trevor. Ansu's glossy presence drew attention from everyone. A small voice from the platform announced herself. "Neville, Mum, I can see Neville. Can I come onto the train to see him?" "Neville isn't a zoo exhibit, Ginny. You've already seen him," a woman answered. "That was when I was little. I don't remember." Ted glanced out the window and saw the red-haired Weasleys standing on the platform, talking with Sirius and his wife, who were seeing off another young wizard. Neville shrank back from the window as if he could disappear into the wall. Even now, despite being spoken of as the boy who lived, he was painfully shy and unsure of himself. Years of pressure from adults, especially his grandmother, had left him jumpy and self-effacing. The train set off north through the countryside toward the highlands. Spirits lifted as Hogwarts drew nearer. A few minutes later there was a knock and the compartment door slid open. A freckled red head popped in. "Excuse me. Oh, this one's full too. All the compartments are full." The head withdrew, then poked back in. "Neville?" Neville forced a stiff, awkward smile. "Hello, Ron." Ted realized who it was. Ron Weasley settled his patched suitcase into the crowded compartment and squeezed in gratefully. "Can I squeeze in? There's no room anywhere else." "Of course," Ted said, glancing at the others. "We're all classmates." "Thanks, thanks." Ron beamed and dragged his luggage aboard. 5 people fit into a carriage meant for 4 easily enough, and soon Ron was talking away to break the ice. Jerry, more at ease now, joined in. Hermione and Ted added the occasional comment, and the compartment warmed into friendly chatter. Neville loosened up and managed a few lines of his own. Naturally, the talk soon turned to Hogwarts and the Sorting Hat. Neville sighed. I'd like Gryffindor, but I just know I'll end up in Hufflepuff. I wish someone would pick me. You're the boy who lived, Ron protested. How can you not be in Gryffindor? Neville forced a bitter smile. I'm the dunderhead boy who luckily lived. Ted, who didn't quite understand all the old stories and nicknames, put Neville at ease. The Sorting Hat mostly listens to what you want. If you really want Gryffindor, hold on to that thought and you'll be sorted there. Ron's eyes widened. Really? You know how the Sorting Hat works? George and Fred said it's a tricky test, but they wouldn't tell me how it works. Ted grinned. Some things you just find out when the time comes. Ron, delighted to have captive listeners, launched into a barrage of family anecdotes. He complained about hand-me-downs. His broom was second-hand, his robes were passed down from Bill, his wizard's chess set was a family heirloom whose pieces liked to boast about coming from his grandfather's time. Even his pet rat Scabbers had been in the family for ages. Everything, he moaned, was used and patched. Ted shrugged and admitted he was in no position to pity Ron. I'm worse off in some ways. Except for my wand, most of my things came from second-hand shops. I don't have a family here, and after school I'll have to manage loans. Ron seemed relieved to have company with problems of his own. At least you've got a wand, he said cheerfully. And how many siblings do you lot have? My family's huge. 7, Ron said proudly. He rattled on about brothers and sisters with the casual, tangled detail of a large family. As Ron listed names, he mangled one in a comical way, calling Percy Peggy by accident, which made Ted's eyebrows climb. The compartment laughed. The small confusions and misrememberings fit in with the easy warmth spreading between them. The rest of the ride slid by in a flurry of silly stories, nervous hopes about houses, and muffled spells practiced in secret. For once, Neville could breathe a little easier, surrounded by classmates who, while new and strange, didn't seem to want anything from him except a friendly conversation. Chapter 1. Potter Percy Weasley, once the petty, ambitious brother whose pride was bigger than a space station and whose life felt thinner than toilet paper, had finally learned in the original timeline that family mattered above all. But in this version, there was no Percy. There was Peggy Weasley. Peggy liked pasta and chocolate cake, loved to dress up like a fairy princess, and her favorite drink was orange juice. She was a piggy girl through and through. She had started at Hogwarts in 1987, was a couple of years older than the Weasley twins, and was now in her 5th year. Peggy Weasley had even become head girl thanks to top marks, but she wasn't the officious, self-important Percy everyone remembered. According to Ron, she was very kind to him. The sisters were on good terms. The butterfly effect had apparently flapped its wings again. Harry, on the other hand, was still Harry Potter, taken in by Sirius and no longer the chosen one. That role had gone to Neville. Percy turning into Peggy was odd but not impossible. Ted, sitting next to them, heard a brief, inexplicable voice in his head. Hello, I'm Peggy, and these are my younger brothers, George, Fred, and Ron. Ha ha! Quite interesting. About an hour into the journey, the compartment door swung open, and a cheerful witch pushed a food trolley down the corridor. Children, would you like something to eat? Don't look at me, Ron said. I've got a sandwich. Don't look at me, Jerry shrugged. I've got bread and cheese. I brought my own food, Ted added, opening a case of jerky and sausages. Hermione, curious to try wizarding snacks, peered at the offerings and frowned. Why is it all candy? As a dentist's daughter, she was careful about sweets, but in the end, she and Neville bought a huge pile and invited everyone to share. Neville, shy but generous and not short of money, was delighted to contribute. Ted produced the beef jerky, dental floss, and big sausages he'd packed. Want some? He offered. They ended up sharing everything. Ron's sandwich was abandoned. Scabbers the rat refused it and seemed completely hyped up from all the candy. The 5 of them ate and chatted. It was easy to make friends on the first leg of term. Neville brightened noticeably with company and proudly introduced his toad, Trevor. In the wizarding world, many witches and wizards kept animal companions, familiars, that often helped with study and at times combat. According to what Ted had learned at the magical pet shop, Toads were commonly chosen by potion makers because of their strong resistance to toxins and their usefulness in potion testing. Neville's potions, however, were probably an exception. Even a magical toad would struggle after some of Neville's concoctions. Ron, cradling his dull, fat rat who was ferociously gnawing on a chocolate frog, announced, "This is my rat, Scabbers!" Ted pointed to a sleek black bird tearing at the jerky. "That's Ansu, the talking raven." "Caw, caw, nice to meet you," Ansu said politely, setting some jerky at his feet and bobbing in a small bow. Everyone was impressed. Seeing that Ted, Hermione, and Jerry didn't know much about wizarding etiquette, Ron took the chance to show off. He jabbed his wand at Scabbers and muttered some nonsense. "Ahem. Yellow fluff, sweet cream and sunshine. Turn this silly fat rat yellow." Whether it was the wand or Ron's words, Scabbers promptly spit a Bertie Bott's every flavor bean straight into Ron's face. Laughter erupted in the compartment, until the laughter outside the door turned into sharp, mocking voices. Draco Malfoy had arrived with Crabbe and Goyle, there to ingratiate himself with Neville. Since Voldemort's downfall, the Malfoys had tried to smooth things over with other families. Malfoy's arrival, however, was not for friendship. It was for the chance to sneer. Draco sneered at Ron. "Red hair and the family can't even manage what they've got. Weasley. My father said you lot are so poor you can't even feed a rat properly. And do you actually have money for Bertie Bott's every flavor beans?" His arrogant tone set everyone's teeth on edge. Ansu the Raven cocked his head, Scabbers snarled, and the whole compartment bristled. Draco, looking down his nose at their patched robes, added to Neville in a probing voice, "Are you sure you want to be friends with these people, the scum of the pure blood, or a poor mudblood?" He flashed a hand as if offering Neville something better. "My father says, choose your company carefully. Perhaps you'd prefer better friends?" Neville shrank back, flustered and scared under so many stares. "No, I don't want to be friends with you. My gran won't let me play." He trailed off, too intimidated to say more. Draco's face went a nasty shade of green. He'd expected at least some interest. Being flatly rejected stung more than he'd anticipated. He spluttered, You actually, no wonder they call you the simple-minded." At that moment, one of his followers reached for the snacks on the table and got bitten by Scabbers with a surprised yelp. He lurched into the other follower, and a small scuffle broke out. Ted, amused, flicked his wand discreetly. Draco suddenly felt his leg go out from under him, and he landed on his backside with a thud. Before Draco could scramble up, a familiar, slightly scolding face leaned over him. Harry Potter, black hair, green eyes, round glasses. This Harry, however, was nothing like the timid boy from other tales. She was bold, brash, and quick to action. "Malfoy, do you like lying on the floor that much?" she said, pushing up her glasses and wagging a small fist. "Stop making a fool of yourself, or I'll give you another one." Draco scrambled up, red-faced, gathered Crabbe and Goyle, and fled down the corridor. "I'll be back," he called over his shoulder. Ted had seen enough in Diagon Alley to guess Malfoy had taken more than one well-aimed knock in his time. Harry laughed when she saw what Ted had done, then noticed Neville and slipped into the already crowded compartment without asking. A four-person carriage was now packed with six. Hermione and her two companions were crammed in, too. How to describe this Harry Potter? Aside from the familiar black hair, green eyes, and glasses, she bore little resemblance to the quiet legend of stories. She was bold, unrestrained, the kind of person who could start a conversation with strangers and make them feel like siblings. She was a big sister figure, the kind who laughed loud and acted first, thought later. Soon Harry and Ron were playing wizard's chess. Neville and Jerry tried coaxing Ansu into performing tricks. Hermione, ever curious, brought up Voldemort with Ted. She had read about Neville's experiences. "What's you-know-who's real name? Why won't anyone say it?" she asked. Ted rolled a stress ball in his hands. "Names in the wizarding world carry power. I think people avoid it because the name itself is dangerous." At the mention of you-know-who, Neville's face went grave as if an invisible weight had settled on his shoulders. "It's best not to say it," he said quietly. "My gran says he put some kind of enchantment on his name. If you say it, he can sense you." Hermione shuddered. "What is it? He's dead, isn't he?" "Lord Voldemort," Ted answered, though he added, "I don't think that's his real name." At the name, Lord Voldemort, Ron, Neville, and Harry all went pale. Apparently, Voldemort had placed a sort of true name perception on his chosen title, an enchantment that could detect anyone who spoke it and feed on the fear or attention to grow stronger. Wizards avoided saying the name because those who understood its danger steered clear, and those who didn't were too frightened to risk it. Ted thought the charm was simple enough to break. If he were handling it, he mused, he'd set up a Muggle media frenzy so millions of people would say the name at once. The sheer volume of attention might overwhelm whatever enchantment Voldemort had left, force it to break, or at least blunt its effect. But wizarding minds tended to be conservative. They avoided the name rather than confront its power. By the time the train began to slow for Hogwarts, it felt like the main cast had assembled. Harry and Ron, Hermione and her cautious curiosity, Neville with Trevor, Ted and Jerry and their odd talents, Ansu, the talking raven, and Peggy's presence looming like a new family tide. Confetti, it seemed, for a new beginning. Inside the compartment, Hermione chattered excitedly about the spells in her textbook. She had a dozen questions for Ted and was practically vibrating with anticipation. It was easy to understand. If I could learn magic, I'd be just as excited. The problem was, she kept peppering Harry, Ron, and Neville, the little wizards from wizarding families, with questions about what spells they'd been taught at home. Of course, the spell that merely changed the color of a rat didn't really count. Ron muttered that he felt like someone was out to get him. Neville and Ron were clearly uncomfortable. Their faces carried the sheepish, wary look of kids who hadn't done much practicing. Even Jerry was trembling. Harry, by contrast, rattled off a long list, Accio, Expelliarmus, and others Ted hadn't even seen yet. It seemed he had learned a lot under Sirius's tutoring. In the original story, Harry's talent was exceptional. This Harry seemed no different. The train rocked on, lulling some of the passengers towards sleep. They had left at noon, and despite the passage of the day, still hadn't reached their destination by sunset. Calling it a special express felt misleading. It was almost a sightseeing tour. By the time the announcement came, it was already dark outside. Harry and Hermione stepped out first to give the four little boys a chance to change into their robes. Then the rest followed. The train eased to a halt, and the six of them formed a line to disembark. The station was small and rough-hewn, and almost completely dark. A very tall figure holding a lantern called from a distance, "First years over here, follow me." Hard to miss, despite the gloom. He was huge, and his voice boomed. "It's Hagrid. Let's go," Harry said, immediately leading the group forward to the front. Hagrid greeted them with a warm, gruff, "Oh, Harry, how are you?" and Neville. They followed Hagrid down a narrow path until the view suddenly opened. The Black Lake lay before them, and a line of small boats waited at the shore. The rocks by the lake were slick with moss. Hagrid called out loudly, "Mind your step! Don't slip!" No sooner had he warned them than two students skidded and nearly fell into the water. "Four to a boat, no more," Hagrid shouted. Harry and three others climbed into the first boat, Ted and Hermione the second. Once everyone was aboard, Hagrid called, "Off we go," and the boats moved out in a single file. Each boat had a small lamp that lit only its own immediate surroundings. Beneath them, the Black Lake lay like a dark mirror, reflecting moon and stars with no ripple. The line of boats drifted forward like a procession cutting through the Milky Way. The first years were too nervous to speak. A complicated mixture of fear and wonder made them silent. Ted, who liked to overthink things, found himself imagining the lake's inhabitants. There were merfolk in the Black Lake, ugly in some accounts, and perhaps varied in type, different colors, different cultures. In some sources, they were described as marine creatures. The lake also housed a giant squid in the stories, and squids are typically marine, not freshwater. All this made Ted wonder whether the Black Lake was actually saltwater, and whether Hogwarts must be near the sea somewhere in the Highlands of Scotland. The geography didn't quite fit with a remote inland lake. He let his thoughts wander and began sketching theories about where the castle might be. "Round this bend, and you'll see Hogwarts for the first time," Hagrid called back. "Take a good look. This'll be a memory you keep for a lifetime." They rounded the cliff, and, in the distance, the silhouette of the castle appeared, lights dotting its battlements. As they drew nearer, the castle loomed larger and more splendid, every light throwing its stonework into relief. This was Hogwarts, vast, ancient, and awe-inspiring. Hermione whispered, awed. Every group of first years comes this way. They say it's so you experience the hardships the founders faced finding a site for the school. Maybe there's something deeper to it, Ted murmured. He felt it then, a great, subtle enchantment linking him to the castle. The whole ritual of bringing first years around the lake felt like an old spell, a binding of student to school. Heads down, Hagrid grunted, his voice echoing deep and cavernous. The boats drew up to a hidden cavern beneath the cliff, and the students disembarked at a small dock. Hagrid led them up a winding and steep staircase, over 200 steps, until they emerged into an open courtyard ringed with pillars. At the far end stood Hogwarts' main gate. Hagrid stepped forward and pounded his huge fist against the door. Dong, dong, dong. The sound was heavy and solid. A bald, surly-looking man opened the door. Are these the first years? Leave them with me, he said. Filch, Hagrid snorted like an engine. You'd better be civil. Filch snorted in return and shepherded the children through the gate, muttering, You lot behave yourselves. If I catch anyone mucking about, you'll be in trouble. As they entered, a cheery electronic voice that only Ted seemed to notice sounded in his head. Ding. Quest triggered. This is Hogwarts, the only school of magic in Great Britain and one of only 3 in Europe. This ancient school, thousands of years old, hides countless secrets waiting for you to explore. What are you waiting for? Discover them, find them, use them. Objective, explore Hogwarts. Progress, 100%. Reward, 1,000 experience, plus 1 skill point, random card. Tip, if you don't explore at night, you haven't really been to Hogwarts. Here. Filch looked ancient, but his legs were surprisingly quick. The first years were already tired from climbing the stairs, and Filch's brisk pace left them gasping. Some of the less fit were sweating. At last, they were led to another tall wooden door, where Filch barked, Wait here, and walked off without a backward glance. The children sagged with relief and began whispering about what they had just seen. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd as several translucent milky white figures drifted through a wall and past them. The first years bubbled with excitement. Some of the Muggle-born children reached out to touch the ghosts' robes. The ghosts were friendly, drifting among them and seeming to welcome the newcomers. Professor McGonagall then appeared, stern-faced. The chatter died at once. Before the welcome feast, we must determine which house each of you will join, she said. Hogwarts has 4 houses. You will be sorted in front of all the teachers and students of the school. This is a very important ceremony. I suggest you tidy yourselves and prepare. Her eyes lingered on Neville and Ron. Neville's cloak was a little untidy, and Ron had a smudge of dirt on his nose from the climb. The rest of them did not look much better. Filch had put them through quite an introduction to the term. McGonagall also spoke of the house cup and school points, stressing honor and conduct. As she led them toward the Great Hall, everyone began to speculate. Whether Muggle-born or pure blood, the first years were nervous about the sorting. Hermione, already flipping through her notes, muttered anxiously about whether there would be a test. Don't worry, they won't test calculus, Ted teased. Hermione shot him a sharp look. What time is it? She whispered. McGonagall opened the doors. Inside the Great Hall, 4 long tables ran the length of the hall, filled with students of all ages. House banners hung from the walls, green for Slytherin, blue for Ravenclaw, red for Gryffindor, and yellow for Hufflepuff. Above, the ceiling looked transparent and star-filled, as if there were no roof at all. Hermione breathed. I read about this in Hogwarts, a history. Ted nodded. That's right. The effect of the ceiling makes it seem like the sky itself is above the hall. 18. Branch, Azkaban. At the end of the 4 long student tables in the Great Hall, where hundreds of students crowded and chattered, a high-backed chair already held a very old, tattered wizard's pointed hat. Further along, curving across the front of the hall, sat the professor's table. In its center, robed in white, was Albus Dumbledore. Even sitting down, he seemed taller than most. His snowy beard trailed well below the table. He looked ancient, but in good spirits. Ted glanced at the staff gathered there. Severus Snape, with his greasy hair and solemn face, even on such a festive morning. Phileas Flitwick, the half-goblin, perched on a raised stool. Professor Quirrell, wrapped in his turban. Good, at least the first year's main setup was intact. If Quirrell hadn't been there, or hadn't been wearing his turban, Ted would have been completely unmoored. If he couldn't find his bearings from the start, it would be a hell of a beginning. Professor McGonagall, holding a parchment, called the students to order. The students whose names I call should come forward, sit on the chair, and put the hat on their heads. The sorting hat on its high-backed stool twisted. Its creases rearranged themselves into eyes and a mouth, and then it began to sing. This is a tale 1,000 years old, of 4 wise wizards, brave and bold. Gryffindor from the rugged moor, Ravenclaw by the tranquil shore, Hufflepuff from the valley wide, Slytherin from the swamps beside. They vowed to share all they know and learn, and so this castle stood by the Black Lake's turn. The first years gaped at the singing hat as if it were the strangest creature they'd ever seen. Ted clapped once, more out of habit than approval. "Not bad singing. Don't make a habit of it," he murmured. McGonagall had clearly heard that refrain before. She moved on. "Hannah Abbott?" "Yes!" Hannah ran up and shoved the hat down over her head. It slid almost to her eyes. "Hufflepuff," the hat declared after a few seconds. The Hufflepuff table cheered. Hannah waved at Ted. She and he had met before through her grandfather, Old Tom. Some things were constants. Characters like Ron's bungled attempts at romance or Seamus Finnegan's explosive talents were the expected color in every year. Seamus, the explosive genius, who could blow up a cauldron on command and later earned the nickname associated with the Moxie bombing incident, would always be Seamus. The sorting took different amounts of time for everyone. Some were slotted instantly, others took a minute or two. Ted felt a twinge of unease. The sorting hat did more than sing. Its ability to probe minds was well known. As a mind mage, Ted had trained his mental defenses. He braced himself. He'd been careful to shield his thoughts, but the hat might still sense something. Years from now, people would spin legends. When you matriculate, all of Hogwarts will resound with your sorting, Azkaban. But for now, his name was called early. "Ted Epiphany," McGonagall announced. She regarded him with that mix of curiosity and approval teachers often showed toward interesting students. Ted nodded and climbed onto the stool. He set the hat over his head. As a mind mage, Ted had techniques. The usual mental peeking detects current thoughts and emotions. It can't pull up memories unless you leave yourself exposed or use brutal methods. Ted let his mind run, skimming books and notes he had read, entire volumes collapsing into quick impressions. Data marched through his head so fast he joked to himself that it was like a megabyte per second. A book could be finished in 10 seconds. If the sorting hat could still make sense of that, it was a legendary artifact indeed. The hat hesitated. "What is that noise?" Ted blinked. The hat sounded confused. After a long pause, he leaned in. "Is there a problem, Mr. Hat?" It's hard to decide. There's a power interfering with me. I can't quite get a clear read." His mental concealment, plus a sort of innate mental resistance, little things he'd honed, had muddled the hat's probing. Coupled with Ted's deliberate flood of unrelated thoughts, the 1,000-year-old hat was thrown off balance. "Shrewd, seeks power, has contempt for rules and authority, Slytherin," the hat first intoned. Ted heard it inwardly. "Huh?" "Intelligent, curious for knowledge, handles problems well, Ravenclaw." "Ted'm." "Bold, drawn to the unknown, courageous and resolute, Gryffindor." "Ha?" "Diligent, contented with an ordinary life, kind and tolerant, Hufflepuff." "What should I do?" Ted snorted inwardly. Was the hat guessing? It was saying everything, fortune-telling by trial. Satisfied he'd confused it, he decided to be more direct. "How old are you, Mr. Hat?" "Hoo-hoo, over 900 years." "Wow, magic that lasts a millennium. That's impressive," Ted said, and couldn't help sounding genuinely impressed. The hat preened. "Oh ho, flattery, flattery, I'm not so old, not so old." Professor McGonagall cleared her throat. The hat snapped to attention. "So, would you happen to sort me into Azkaban?" Ted teased. The hat laughed. "You're amusing. I like you." Ted exhaled. "As long as it's not Slytherin, I'm fine." "Are you sure? You could do great things there," the hat purred. "I said I'm content with an ordinary life," Ted said. "Besides, do you think a yellow-skinned muggle orphan from a small orphanage belongs in Slytherin?" "Well, since you insist, Ravenclaw," the hat finally shouted. After what felt like ages, The hat sorted him into Ravenclaw. Ted pulled the hat off and bowed automatically to it. McGonagall had taken 5 minutes to be sorted into Gryffindor once, but the hat's indecision had been its own drama. McGonagall looked at Ted with a brief, private disappointment. If any teacher had wanted him in Gryffindor, she did, but Ted didn't regret the outcome. He wasn't keen on being under her thumb. He waved to Hermione and Harry as he took his seat at the Ravenclaw table. A few Ravenclaws nodded a greeting. Nearby, Ron whispered to Neville and Jerry, "Too bad, Ted didn't get Gryffindor." Jerry shrugged. "That doesn't stop us being friends, does it?" Neville agreed. These 5, Ted, Hermione, Harry, Ron, Neville, Jerry, were each other's first friends at Hogwarts. House divisions wouldn't change that. Ted settled in and thought. Ravenclaw wasn't bad. Scholar, researcher, someone who loved knowledge. The house name itself, Ravenclaw, suggested a raven's talon, keen-sighted, plundering knowledge. Ravenclaw's motto rang in his head in a vaguely poetic array of phrases about wisdom, learning, farsightedness, and love of study. Even if Ravenclaw hadn't produced as many flashy heroes in the old stories, it had its own quiet pride. A small chime sounded in his head. Quest, Magic World. Completed. Reward, 500 XP, Magic +1, random card. Ted clenched his fist to resist opening the card right then. Too risky in front of everyone. He'd wait until later. Professor McGonagall called Hermione's name. She darted up, sat on the stool, and the hat went down on her head. Joke. Harry stepped forward and sat. McGonagall placed the enormous sorting hat on his head. The hat's voice creaked in Harry's mind. Very brave, very wise. Materials science would suit you well. Harry's inner voice immediately protested. No bioengineering, no chemical engineering, not environmental engineering, not materials science. No bioengineering, chemical engineering, environmental engineering, or materials science, the hat mused. You could do great things. Since you've decided, then, civil engineering. Harry's face went blank. He slumped as if someone had drained the color and hope from him. Next up in that alternate universe, Harry Potter and the Concrete Stone, Harry Potter and the Project Manager's Office, Harry Potter and the Tower Crane Operator, Harry Potter and the Baiju Cup, Harry Potter and the Supervision Department, Harry Potter and the Prince of Bathhouses, Harry Potter and the Red Barrel of Death. Thanks to reader Sino Kishimasamada for the 100 reward. 19. Alien Little Wizard. Ravenclaw, 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 Hermione whispered insistently. Sorting Hat. Ah, studious little girl, and not lacking in courage. Ravenclaw, Ravenclaw, Ravenclaw. Hermione didn't wait to hear more. She kept whispering. Well, could you just listen to me for a second? Ravenclaw, Ravenclaw, Ravenclaw. All right. The hat relented. You would certainly do well there, though Gryffindor would suit you as well. Off you go, then Ravenclaw. Hermione breathed a relieved sigh, her face red as she set the hat down and hurried toward the Ravenclaw table. The small group of Ravenclaws applauded, and Ted scooted over to make room. How did you end up in Ravenclaw? Ted asked, surprised. The Sorting Hat's decision had changed from what he'd expected. Hermione lifted her chin just enough to look modest. Perhaps the Sorting Hat thought I preferred studying. Soon the sorting letters reached H. Harry Quinn Potter. Professor McGonagall called his full name. Ted flinched. The middle name sounded ominous to him, as if it were some grim riddle. As expected, Harry was sent to Gryffindor. In the original story, the hat had paused for a long time, possibly because of the Voldemort connection, and even considered Slytherin. This time it was quick, only a few seconds. Has it already begun? Ted wondered. The ceremony was over almost before he noticed. Harry lifted the hat with a smooth gesture, swept the hem of his robe, and strode toward the Gryffindor table, arms out as if walking into light. Roar! The Gryffindors cheered. The new girl fit right in. The Weasley twins were the loudest, jumping up and down, and a slightly older red-haired girl who looked like Paige Weasley smiled at Harry. She and Harry already knew each other. Jerry was called next. He had no surname, so his name was sorted by its first letter. The hat didn't hesitate and put him in Gryffindor in about 3 seconds. The Gryffindors welcomed him warmly. They didn't mock the round mouse ears at the sides of Jerry's head. If anything, they were delighted. We have a little mouse now. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Jerry was moved, thanking everyone who greeted him. Not long after came Neville. When Neville Longbottom's name was called, the hall fell quiet for a moment. The Sorting Hat deliberated this time, taking almost 5 minutes before finally deciding. Gryffindor! Neville hurried off, forgetting to take the hat off again. Ted smiled. The repetition of familiar scenes was oddly comforting. Ah, we've got a Longbottom again. The boy who lived, someone joked, and the Gryffindors rushed forward to shake Neville's hand. Neville's face went red, then pale, then red again. The attention was almost too much for him, and he nearly fainted. Malfoy followed, and, unsurprisingly, went to Slytherin. By the time Ron Weasley's turn came, there were only a few names left. He, too, was sorted into Gryffindor. The sorting ceremony ended quickly. Ted felt the castle's magic shift, like a grand spell spreading through the halls and then fading away. The entrance ceremony enchantment seemed complete. These little wizards were now Hogwarts students in more than name. The Gryffindor and Ravenclaw tables sat side by side. Neville and Ron took seats behind Ted and Hermione. Neville turned and whispered to Ted, "Thank you, Ted. You were right. I kept whispering Gryffindor, and I really got sorted into Gryffindor." Ted smiled. "You were sorted because you have qualities worth valuing. You're brave. Maybe you haven't noticed it yet, but it's always been there." Ron sneered. "How come Ted sounds more like a professor than an actual professor?" Jerry nodded emphatically. Hermione glared at both of them, as if to say, Ted's words made sense. What are you two on about? The sorting ceremony results were announced. Gryffindor 10, Ravenclaw 9, Hufflepuff 9, Slytherin 8. 36 new students in all. Ted thought the British magical world was facing a population problem. Among the deans, the headmaster, and the professors, none seemed to have children. If this was the trend, the wizarding community didn't look promising. The numbers here were a bit higher than in the original records. Ted couldn't be certain, since the original text didn't list every 1991 freshman. What was unmistakable was the presence of non-human students like Jerry. They hadn't been part of the original story. And Jerry wasn't alone at Hogwarts. There was Clara Flash, a gnome girl, barely over a meter tall. She was only 11, but might still grow. How much, no one could say. Gnomes were known for skill in magic, jewelry making, and magical technology. Over the past years, Hogwarts had accepted several magically gifted non-human students, the fallout of the second celestial convergence that had brought sentient races from other worlds. Some children who had migrated to this world at a young age were now old enough to attend Hogwarts. Other non-human students included Goff Oasis, a second-year Hufflepuff boy of the Oxhorn race, with 2 horns and a stout, broad build, taller and wider than his classmates and looking a bit slow-witted. Muradin Bronzebeard, a 14-year-old dwarf in Gryffindor who already had a full beard and would soon be braiding it. Ida Sylph, an 18-year-old elf in Ravenclaw who still looked like a child and spoke in a high, childish voice. Elves aged more slowly and lived much longer. And Itori, a 5th-year Hufflepuff rabbit-eared girl, the first non-human admitted to the school after Dumbledore personally persuaded the board to accept her, setting a precedent. The arrival of non-humans had shaken the wizarding community. The school tried to conceal them from muggles to avoid exposure, but the issue also raised questions about resources and privilege. Non-humans brought unique knowledge and abilities, but also took up living space and opportunities, creating competition. Where once purebloods had targeted muggle-born wizards to make purebloods great again, now there were even stranger competitors. The wizarding world had split into factions, those friendly to non-humans, the neutrals, and the opposed, mainly pureblood traditionalists. The neutral faction held the most members. The last celestial convergence hadn't brought new sentient races. It had mostly meant monster hunting and an influx of magical resources. But the convergence 10 years earlier had introduced many different non-human peoples. Fortunately, their numbers were still small. Otherwise, conflict might have been unavoidable. This integration would be one of the greatest challenges the magical world faced, perhaps even more dangerous than Lord Voldemort. Hiss! 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 Neville suddenly clutched his forehead. Jerry leaned over, alarmed. "What's wrong?" Neville forced a smile. "Nothing, just a sudden headache." Harry, who'd had some experience with such things, suggested, "Maybe you caught a draft while rowing." Ron agreed. "Yeah, eat something later and you'll be fine." Neville knew it wasn't a draft, and food wouldn't help. It was his scar stinging, like someone prodding it with a needle. The sensation lasted only a few seconds and then faded. He didn't contradict his friends. The warmth of their concern felt good. Across the hall, Professor Quirrell, wrapped in his turban, seemed to be talking to someone with his back turned. Ted smirked inwardly. Quirrell probably could only sleep on his side. Severus Snape stood nearby, arms folded, staring sullenly at Harry as he laughed and chatted with his new friends. 20. Sing the school song? Ted got the whole job. After the sorting ceremony, Headmaster Dumbledore stood to say a few words. If this were China, Ted thought wryly, he'd probably be digging into a bag of jerky right about now. At Hogwarts, however, there was no need. Dumbledore cleared his throat and proudly intoned, "Nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak." Hermione, who'd been eagerly waiting for a proper speech, looked at Ted like he'd gone mad. Ted shrugged. Wizards have their quirks. He's over 100. Cut him some slack. Hermione's expression said everything. Are you serious? Before anyone could ask anything, Dumbledore waved his wand, and with a flick, an enormous feast appeared along the 10-meter-long tables. Plates, bowls, tureens in every size and color piled high. There was roasted beef, roast chicken, honey-glazed chicken legs, honey-glazed pork ribs, braised lamb chops, sausages, steaks, bacon, mountains of meat. There were pies of every sort, pumpkin, apple, pork, potatoes boiled, roasted, mashed, plus fries with ketchup, Yorkshire puddings, peas, carrots, broths, pumpkin juice, orange juice, and even peppermints. Ted had been in this world 2 months and had never seen a spread like it. Whoever said Britain had no good food hadn't been to Hogwarts. House elves, he decided, were culinary gods. The students erupted. Ron dug in like a man on a mission. If there were a mukbang channel at Hogwarts, Ron could become an instant celebrity. Half the hall inhaled the food with animal enthusiasm. Ron suddenly came over, a chicken leg in hand. "Oi, Ted, why are you eating with 2 little wands?" he asked, bewildered. Ted rolled his eyes. "They're chopsticks, mate. I'm Asian. Of course I carry them." Half an hour later, the main courses had mostly vanished. With a soft "bew," the dishes disappeared and were replaced by dessert. Ice cream, chocolate muffins, jam tarts, strawberries, jelly, rice pudding, millefeuille, another table overflowing. Kids couldn't resist. Britain's sweet tooth was in full force. Despite being full, everyone forced more into their mouths. Hermione, from a dentist's family, ate sparingly. Ted had never liked sweets much either, just a bit of ice cream and some strawberries. A sudden hush came from a nearby table. A ghost emerged beneath it. Nearly headless Nick, Gryffindor's resident ghost, his almost severed neck on display. Even translucent and milky white, it was grisly enough to make people recoil. Hermione shut her eyes and twisted away. Ted swallowed the strawberry in his mouth and said, "Mr. Nick, I sympathize, but could you be a little more considerate of those of us trying to eat?" "Oh, sorry, I thought you'd like it," Nick replied, looking genuinely hurt. Ted thought, "This is R-rated. Who'd like that at dinner?" When the feast ended, the plates vanished and the dishes sparkled clean, as if polished by magic. Dumbledore rose again, this time more serious. "First years," he said, "the forbidden forest to the northeast is forbidden. Older students, take note as well." He shot a meaningful look at the Weasley twins. "And anyone who doesn't wish to meet with an unfortunate accident should not enter the corridor on the right side of the 3rd floor." Perfect, Ted thought. If you want to keep people out, just lock the door. Of course, the instant Dumbledore mentioned it, the students buzzed with curiosity, especially Gryffindors. Right away, a familiar ping sounded in Ted's head. Ding, mission triggered. The corridor on the right side of the 3rd floor, right? Since the old headmaster handed you such a hint, it would be rude not to check. Objective, go see what's hidden in the corridor on the right side of the 3rd floor. Reward, 200 XP, random card. A grin spread across Ted's face. A mission, what a pleasant surprise. Dumbledore continued as if nothing had happened. Also, our caretaker, Mr. Filch, reminds everyone not to use magic in the corridors. Filch stood by the hall wall, bald and scowling, with a lively cat at his feet. "Now that you've eaten," Dumbledore beamed, "let us sing the school song together. To whatever tune you prefer, sing." He pointed his wand into the air. Huge golden letters formed midair, each as large as a bucket. The lyrics floated above them. "Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy-Warty Hogwarts. Teach us something, please. Whether we be old and bald or children with skinned knees, our minds may grasp some strange delight. Another ping in Ted's head. Ding. Mission triggered. Come on, showtime. Objective. Sing the school song and make a memorable impression on students and teachers. Reward. 200 XP. Random card. Ted felt his spirit ignite. If this was what was required, he was wide awake. He grabbed a knife and fork and started tapping a rhythm on the plates and bowls. He cleared his throat and launched into his own rendition, part march, part parody, with ridiculous gestures and over-the-top flourishes. He'd even prepared an entire backup plan. If the percussion and song didn't work, he'd break into a full musical number with instruments, singing, dancing, whatever it took to get noticed. If those failed, he had an outrageous list of encore options. He promised himself he wouldn't stop until he'd earned those 200 experience points. Lord Voldemort can't stop me today, he muttered. The hall fell silent, then astonished. Even the Weasley twins paused in mid-prank. Everyone stared at Ted, mouths open. Some students' legs started to twitch, as if put under a jinx. Most of the crowd thought this art form was decades ahead of its time and would only be appreciated 30 years from now. That didn't matter. Ted was going all out. Hermione's eyes were wide as saucers. Neville looked stunned, stuck as if hit by Petrificus totalis. Jerry's face read plainly, show off. Ron looked as if he'd lost the ability to comprehend the universe. Harry just stared, bewildered. For Ted, shame didn't exist. I'm a mind mage, he told himself. My spirit is strong. I want XP more than dignity. Slowly, a single tear appeared at the corner of Dumbledore's eye. He dabbed it away and murmured, "How touching." That little sound was the dam burst. The great hall exploded into thunderous applause. The students clapped until their hands reddened. Some Gryffindors even whistled wildly. Professor McGonagall tried to suppress a smile and shot glares at the more unruly whistles. She looked mortified in the way of a parent watching their child behave outrageously in public. The Weasley twins, usually proud of their own boldness, were openly impressed. "Blimey," George said. "I thought we were brave. This bloke's something else." "Lionhouse needs talent like this," Fred added, as if bestowing the highest compliment. Ted soaked up the chaotic approval like a sponge, grinning wildly. The mission completed itself in his head. 200 XP, a random card, and a story none of these students would forget.